Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Curse by Jennifer Wilson. When one gets to travel back in time, is it a blessing or a curse? Luffy doesn't know. But when the Pirate King wakes up on the Moby Dick, he's so tired of living. Meanwhile, his previously dead crew desperately searches for an answer, and the Marines retraces the greatest schism since its founding. And what's this about Raftel? Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Many years in the future, Captain Luffy. The young woman stood up, hurriedly rubbing at her eyes. Is it true then? Rather than a reply, the Pirate King sat down heavily, holding his head in his hands. Slowly, he gave a nod. Feel free to yell and scream at me. I deserve it, he morosely said. They didn't have to come after me. It was their choice, she says, shielding the hurt that his death had brought to her heart. I knew it long ago when he sailed away. Only bad things come from deaths, or so I've known. You don't hate me, he whispered, uncovering his face. Luffy's eyes were brimming with tears, and so was hers. But she was a listener by nature, and so she quietly cupped his face, and brought her nose close to his. No, I don't. But why have you come? The young woman stroked through his dark hair. Her loved one had departed, but his wishes had remained true. And she had loved each paper that retold his stories like pages from a fairy tale. His exploits were almost akin to the imaginary explorers and sailors that he used to think up on a beautiful summer day like this. I need you to be part of something, Luffy said. What say you to being my companion? Companion, she echoed, frowning in thought. For what? Luffy scratched his head in quiet thought, before taking out a piece of parchment. On it was a picture of a ship so unlike any she had ever known. For one, the dimensions seemed to be extraordinarily huge for a ship. For another, there were various mechanical things attached to it that she could not recognize. This is only going to be a backup plan in case negotiations fall through, he said, no humor in his voice. But there is a high chance that the world as we know it would be destroyed in the next few years. There is a ship named Noah that is remarkably like it, but it's been torn and broken down. This is a new one, and I hope that you could be part of my ship. You want me to be your nakama? She politely said, causing Luffy to wince. No, he quickly replied. No, this isn't just being my nakama. This is a commitment of a lifetime, and I can't say that I'll be able to come to your rescue as easily as I can rescue others. Sniper, I probably didn't ask you the first time, but why do you insist on going by code names? Mary asked even as the pair continued their movement through Caesar's laboratory. For us 20, we gave up our names in exchange for an extension of our own mortality, but you didn't use the same route as us, right? Jacob did. Sniper remarked, but instead of creating new lives different from what we once led, we repossessed our own bodies. Keeping up code names ensures that we aren't caught by the Marines when carrying out barely legal activities, or associating with fishmen and mermen. I hear that one of my companions had done the same, because of her particular ability. Mary recalled the pink-haired mermaid princess which too held a key to Raftel. But our captain objected to us robbing our present selves' future. He felt that our problems should not spread further. Then your captain is being naive. The moment we stepped into the past, our own future ceased to exist, Sniper scoffed. Sniper, do you think what happened in the future really won't happen again? Mary felt her heart seize up upon the incoming realization. Sniper's head tilted in an inquiring fashion. My captain had tried to stop the deaths of the Rumbar pirates. Is he mad? I thought he wanted Dead Bones, Brook as his crew? Exactly, but Brook's crew still died in the end. Mary's fist clenched. So here's my question. Based on the time rubber band theory, how much would our actions affect the course of our future? Sniper frowned in thought, even as they continued to move towards the biscuit room at a jog. We may not know for certain, but Jacob found an exception to this rule. That you guys, meaning the 20 Guardians, are able to affect the future up to a certain extent with the keys you carry. Change the future? With our keys? Mary continued to smile hesitantly. while her mind was roiling with the possibilities that entailed. Maybe that's why her captain had asked her to stay hidden. Yes, unlike he and Jacob and the leader of the third power, they had the potential to select the new pirate king. Not that I have any captain in mind. Her captain would have been the first choice, but because she had been laying low for a while, there was no way that she could have found another captain. She was no natural sailor. She was simply someone who loved listening to stories and letting her imagination wander. Yes. Oh, here we are. Mary cooled her heels, literally, as the temperature started to rapidly drop within the room. Who are you? A green-haired slim beauty strode right in front of them, taking off her glasses. Did Virgo send you? What do you think? Their only answer was the wind gustling about their ears as snow flooded the room. Monet, I presume. Sniper unsheathed her sword. Unfortunately for you, I've done this before. Mary, go ahead. I'll take care of her as soon as possible. And what makes you think you can do that? A gust of cold wind blew through as the door started to freeze, bringing a biting chill into the passage. Sniper smirked before disappearing in a whirlwind. Because I've done this before. The blizzard nearly blinded Mary with its sudden onslaught, but Mary could still hear the clashing of steel against steel as Sniper continued to make use of Soru to dodge every blow that Monet could fire. A hailstorm of snow rabbits flew in an attempt to slow Mary's movement, but with a single utilization of hockey. A corner of the door was cut off, allowing Mary a clear path through. Mary whizzed past the fighting duo, right into the connecting tunnel. Right then. Onto the biscuit room. Mary nodded, continuing her journey onwards. What are you? A hoarse voice croaked out. Sniper simply looked on as the secretary tried to reassemble her body back together. But she continued to fall apart, fear cutting through her like no sword had done in this lifetime. Sniper touched her shoulder, where the nerves had frozen. Yes, she knew that there were better ways to ensure that her target was solid enough. But why had she allowed herself to be bitten there once again? Was what Mary said genuine? Or to distract her? Sniper knew that the Marines should not have killed the closest companions of the Pirate King's crew. Instead of extending the uneasy peace, they had created an overwhelming enemy as the web surrounding the Pirate King became clear. And Mary was one of the examples of people who should have never been wronged. Hell hath no fury but a scorned woman indeed. A vigilante. For that was what she was. A person unsanctioned by any government to enforce her own form of justice. Who could be certain that their definition was correct? The Neo-Marines who held their absolute justice? Or the self-defense force, whose creation was motivated by the Pirate King's actions? Sniper didn't know justice anymore. But was that going to help her? The purpose of coming to the past was to ensure that that didn't happen again. But by following orders, were they retracting their steps and delving into hell itself? Or were they acting as the devil's advocate to the selection of a king? She felt a rush of air behind her. With one flick, she drew blood. The snow woman fell, her last-ditch attack backfired. Blood gurgled through Monet's mouth as the would-be harpy breathed her last. Sniper stared at her dying opponent. Pity at the woman who aided the Don Quixote family in taking over Dressrosa. She couldn't hate her. Both were women being pulled by very different fates. But neither could Sniper sympathize with a woman who had chosen such an unworthy person as Doflamingo to be a king. If you're still alive even after this, then hear this. I knew people like Don Quixote Doflamingo. They're people who love only themselves, and as much as their subordinates are deceived into thinking that they are the exceptions. Careful there, Wooden Elf, would you, little snipe? They're but just pawns. You'll never understand, Monet whispered. Oh, I do. Pity coated her voice. But I found a better commander to follow. She frisked her opponent's body and found the Den Den no Mushi hidden in Monet's clothes. Sniper was envious. How had she hidden the snail in those tight-fitting clothes? And with a few flicks of her sword, damaged the receiver. Doflamingo won't be able to give orders directly now. If you do think of trying to kill us all, be warned. We have it all covered. While suicide runs were her men's specialty, they still had practice in setting and defusing explosions. Pura pura puru. Mary, Sniper, you liar. Mary's tone was as biting as the wind in the tunnel. There aren't any children here, Captain. She materialized next to the cloaked king. Ka Mary. Her captain spoke monotonously, motioning towards the fallen figure. I have something for you to take care of. She knelt, eyes monitoring the dead. No unconscious man. Several gunshots. Signs of having been kicked in the face, possible concussion. Lips turning blue, but chapped and dry, implying malnutrition of some kind. How the hell was he still alive? Something was crying in the distance. Her captain's head shot back, turning his gaze towards the crier. Mary, stabilize his condition. Boy, come here. The small person stood back, wrapped in a warm cloak of his own, but continued to feverishly cry regardless of the shushing sounds that her captain had made. The snow made the white patches on his skin stand out even more, but rather than shivering in the cold, his hands made grasping motions towards the unconscious soul. Can you heal him? Her captain bent down, scooping the boy in his arms. The boy instinctively curled up, but continued to reach out for the man lying between them. Mary glanced at him. Luffy, no Saru, continued to wear the indifferent expression of many years, but there was something like desperate hope peeking out of those blank eyes. Her captain had been apathetic to the cries of those surrounding him for over 30 years. Perhaps it was to be expected, as he refused to take on more burdens that he couldn't carry. Now, however, this man had grown more determined, more pig-headed than his old self. Mary looked at the patient on the ground between them. Broken bones, possible concussion, heavy blood loss. It was about time these healing hands were put to good use. If I can look after you, she said, pointing at her stubborn yet optimistic captain, who was now grinning at her like a complete idiot regardless of the alarming situation that they had gotten themselves into. I can probably look after him. Saro's loony expression softened into something like a grateful smile. Then I thank you. He handed her the wary-looking boy, who looked confused at this sudden turn of events, and cradled the man between his arms. Let's go back to my ship. There were several cannons fired in the distance, but both she and the captain, who had lost his name, ignored it as they continued their journey back to the opposite shore. Trafalgar Law was absolutely terrified when he woke up, and no wonder, for he had fallen asleep in a stranger's arms, while not lying down at all. His hands and legs felt numb, and refused to move even as he willed them desperately to do so. Was he captured? If so, who had done it? The Marines? The Don Quixote pirates? Or the pirates that Khorasan had stolen from? Khorasan! He yelled, attempting to sit up, but was motioned to lie down by a woman. A nurse. He watched her closely. What was she going to do? Law froze. Minion Island had no hospitals to begin with. He turned, and looked out of the open window. The sea, and the horizon, was gently moving up and down. A ship then. But not the Don Quixote ship. Nor a marine ship. Who had kidnapped them? Could they be after the Ope no Mi? Or were they bounty hunters taking advantage of a weak and immobile target? Law was not going to let anyone take him by surprise. He reached out for a pocket knife he usually kept on him, but instead of the clothes he remembered wearing, Law found that he was wearing a clean set of pajamas. Hold on and let me explain, she said, stilling his movements. It's been 2 weeks since I picked you off Minion Island. Your friend is resting in the next room. I am not out to capture you. She opened her palms, displaying no weapons. Law scrutinized the woman more carefully. She had long blonde hair tied up in a loose bun, and dressed in normal clothes, not unlike the ones that civilians wore. The ship that they were on seemed worn down but well maintained. My name is Mary, she said, pointing at herself. How about you? Law was tempted to answer, but shook his head. Instead, he tried to stand up, but fell over clumsily instead. The woman winces sympathetically, and he could hear the sound of her footsteps as she bent down to pick him up. Law tried to thank her, but the first words to come out of his mouth was, "Where's Khorasan?" The woman sighed, shaking her head. "I'll bring you there," she said, opening her arms. Over Law's weak protests, he found himself being carried from one room to the next, and gasped silently as he met the sight of his friend lying prone on the bed. He received a pretty nasty concussion, she comments, interrupting his train of thought as he drags his eyes away from Khorasan. I don't know when he'll wake up, but he will. Thanks, he says. Out of the last 6 months, no one had looked at him with those eyes that said, I want to heal you. Instead, they wore scared, terrified expressions that they were going to get the amber lead syndrome from him, and that it was contagious. Why aren't you scared of me? He asks. I have the... He can't bring himself to say it, but the woman understands his point and sits down next to both him and Khorasan. I'm a doctor who was trained in a more advanced area, she said, moving a lock of hair back behind her ear. And I've dealt with poison treatments before. Poison? The woman hummed in agreement. Yes. Foxglove, aconite and other plant-based poisons are popular in the Grand Line. But sometimes heavy metal poisoning could be found. I used chelation therapy, which makes use of a chemical to bind the aculated lead such that it can be excreted out. Then, I'm cured now. If the treatment was that easy and readily available, then why hadn't they met her before everything had gone to hell on Minion Island? Why had Khorasan nearly died, if any doctor could easily pull it off? In most cases, yes. However, the amber lead syndrome is different such that it binds to the DNA of the person, and thus this treatment would be unable to remove lead poisoning of that sort, but only alleviate the symptoms. So, I'm still dying in other words. He felt a shaky, unkind smirk spread across his knew it wasn't going to be so simple. For the past few months, Law had been moving in and out of consciousness. No simple treatment could easily alleviate this disease. His father would have easily found a cure long ago were it so. Don't say that. You have the ope no mi, don't you? She harumphs. Only those who are willing to try can save themselves. Law touches at the white patches that are covering his entire body. There is something akin to hope blossoming in his chest. For the first time, he can see a future beyond a death bordered by the barbed wire fences of Flevens. It's a nice feeling, but he's too broken to hope for a miracle. I don't know about that, he says, stretching out his palm. I don't know how to use this thing. The woman rolls her eyes but pinches his cheek gently, provoking a yell of annoyance. Then it's a good thing I actually have a book that tells me how. I'll bring it over. She went out of the room, humming a soft tune. Law looked back at the sleeping figure of his guardian and caregiver over the last 6 months of his life. Khorasan had not needed him in the first place. He had sacrificed his position in the Don Quixote family, his cover, to protect Law. How could anyone be so altruistic, so selfless? If their positions had been reversed, then Law would have left Khorasan far behind, and continued to maintain his high position and continued to spy on Doflamingo. Khorasan didn't need Law at all, whereas the other members of the Don Quixote family only saw him in terms of the usefulness he entailed. They had only valued him in terms of what he could give to them, whereas Khorasan had abandoned his mission to help him. Law made his decision on the spot. If he were to survive recovering from the amber lead syndrome, and had the power to protect Khorasan, then he will. With Doflamingo after him, and Khorasan once he found out that he was alive, then they would both be killed. Law's eyes narrowed. Doflamingo had to be gotten rid of, for Khorasan. Law, I've found the book. The woman came back into the room, holding up a hardcover volume that had pages folded up and dog-eared. Like the ship, it looked worn, but well cared for, and as she opened up the book, Law recognized that one of the pages folded up had been the ope no mi. Were you searching for it? He asks, pointing at the page. The woman's eyes saddened, as she brushed her fingers against the image of the heart-shaped fruit. No, but I once knew someone who ate it. He was a funny kind of guy, really. All sarcastic and rude and unbelievably serious. Taught me plenty. Law watched she blink tears away, but he died. You don't want the fruit? Mary shook her head, chuckling as she glanced at him. Heavens, no, I do like being able to swim. But I think that the fruit chooses the person who eats it. You're kind of like him, but different at the same time, she says, rubbing at his head. For one, there's a lot more in your future than in his. My future? Law made a face. What are you talking about? Nothing. Actually, forget what I just said. It's just a figure of speech really, she says, waving the comment off. Now let's see how to work this thing. Law blearily opened his eyes. He had dreamed of his past again. He stared at the island where both his guardians were searching for poisoned children. Punk Hazard. The name of an abandoned island that was once host to Vegapunk's laboratory. It would have been interesting to investigate further. Perhaps dissect one of the native species to see how they adapt to the poisonous gas. However, he wasn't about to risk his ass for a small investigation. There were 2 admirals on the island, and he hadn't exactly forgotten about the pacifista on Sabodi Archipelago, or the stories of how Kizaru had went after Basil Hawkins. Law was brave, but he wasn't foolhardy, and if he were to steal the throne properly, then it meant that he had to act carefully. Captain! Beppo cried out as the bear mink rushed over him. The Whitebeard pirates are flagging us over. Law's jaw dropped figuratively. The hell? He wanted to tell his men to submerge, but before he could do so, something landed on his ship. I knew I recognized the ship, some pipsqueak shouted out. Law blinked once, twice, and stared at the creature. Are you a mink? Because the thing standing on his deck seemed to be crossed between a raccoon dog and a human. No, he's not from Zoo. Beppo helpfully interjects. Looks like one though. No, I'm not. The thing grabs him by the wrist, and he wrenches it away immediately. Who the hell are you then? I'm from the Straw Hat Pirates. Oh, so he was with Straw Hat then. Don't care. Get off my ship. Even when they shared some experiences on Sabodi Archipelago, that didn't give a reason why he had to help the Straw Hat crew as well. I need your help with a patient. Despite himself, Law's ears pricked up. Oh, who? He said, tapping his feet. The Tanuki, cotton candy lover, Chopper, that was his name, bore a grim expression. Whitebeard. Oh, the captain of this ship was ill. That's interesting. Reports from the New World told of how the man had been injured at Marineford. Was that the outcome then? And why would I rescue a rival to the throne then? Chopper huffed. Because he's a patient, and I think it's the doing of the fleet admiral. Oh, so it was Jacob behind the lack of Whitebeard's appearance then? However, Law reminded himself that he wasn't about to waste any energy that could have been used to rescue Khorasan. And that by helping Whitebeard out a bit, he was indirectly assisting a rival for the throne of Raftel. Not to mention he wasn't obligated to do anything for the Straw Hat Pirates anyway. But Law had to get back at Jacob for risking Khorasan's and Mary's lives for a couple of children. And there was the matter that he was not going to move a finger to assist them in doing so. Good things come to people who do good deeds as well. Well then. Let's see what I can do about that, he says, pushing the brim of his hat downwards. It would be interesting to play with the sophisticated medical equipment that he knew had to be on board that ship. The man was an emperor of course, and had to be able to get the best technology that the Grand Line could offer. Law might actually be able to acquire something useful out of being a Samaritan in this scenario. Oi, I'm going on board. Shachi, Beppo, take charge of the scalpel while I'm gone. Shachi and Penguin breathed a sigh of relief. Idiots, as if Whitebeard was in a well enough condition to cause an earthquake in the first place. Then Chopper grew 5 feet. Maybe Shachi had a right to worry after all? I'll carry you there. The now larger version of Straw Hat's crew jumped up, and leapt over to the moby. What had Law gotten himself into? I don't understand. Smoker ran his hands through his hair. Sniper and I had confirmed that there was the presence of children there earlier. Did you see them with your own eyes then? No, but when we were here the first time, Smoker started to pace, chugging heavily on his cigar. They had already been there for 3 years in a row. On hindsight, it makes more sense that they were moved off the island before the fleet admiral battle. Mary's grim tone reverberated through the passage. If the admirals were to discover that such an inhumane experiment was being carried out, Aokiji would never have kept this quiet. You're right to say that, but the two were battling at the center of the island. Even as the climate changed, it made no sense for them to evacuate the children along with them. Furthermore, we know that they were brought into the island even with the gas hanging over the prisoners and Caesar, so they would not have chosen to move the facility away in lieu of a battle between those two. In other words, they're hidden within the facility. Sniper, we're currently in which building? We've just gone from room A, which connects between the entrance of the research institute to the second room. Room B. I went ahead to the biscuit room while Sniper finished off Monet the secretary. There are plenty of prisoners there, but they refused to provide information under interrogation, so no dice there. Very well, Smoker said, frowning in thought. Sniper, destroy the SAD. Wait. Rosinante interrupted him, frowning. If we destroy SAD, we'll rile up Daffy and Kaido, which is what the Marines won't be able to survive as a divided group. However, if we were to make it appear as an accident, then Kaido would come after Daffy instead, thus avoiding the blame. Aren't you contradicting yourself? How do we know? I see. Smoker rubbed his chin. That makes sense. Could you explain? I still don't get what RO is planning to pull. Say if a certain pair of admirals were to accidentally wreck their place, then the liability is on Doflamingo for not protecting it before because both of them have spies in the Marines. one of which we had just recently gotten rid of. Smoker's mouth twitched. I believe that his job was to protect the sad production line, while ensuring that news of the children had not gotten out. However, Kaido, being a perfectly normal pirate, would be understandably for blame his supplier, Luffy. This would lead to a clash between the two, leading to immense pressure on Luffy. Doflamingo transfers his anger on Caesar, and thus with both Doflamingo and Smiley to deal with, leaving his men nice and easy to handle. Smoker finished. And how do you think that we're going to get those two to come up to the research institute? Mary muttered in return. Bait coming in 5, 4. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Smoker commented. So once again, we're relying on them? Again? 3.2. Got it. We'll continue to eliminate surveillance cameras then. Thank you very much for your assistance. 1. There was an almighty crash from the wall above them, and as light shined directly down for the first time in years, there was a roar of frustration as the gigantic reptile flip-flopped, toppling under the weary strength of its long flight. 3 pirates met the eyes of 2 Marines. Ah, Smoker. Good timing. Smoker felt his palm meet his face. Good day, Black Leg. The Pirate King's cook grinned. Hawa-chan. On one hand, the rubber band theory that Luffy had discovered mentions that things would try to stick to their usual course. But on the other hand, there would be changes that could make their future unpredictable, making their knowledge moot. Take Marineford. No ace sacrificing himself led to Luffy not in as much danger, which meant Law did not come to rescue him with only Sabaody to link the two together. Would Luffy and Law create an alliance? As of this moment, very unlikely. But you need to remember Jacob's viewpoint. He's trying to push things back to their original course. Black, Victor Catchit. You're quite right to say that. Luffy isn't aggressive as a person, but he would act on what he sees as unjust. Which brings us to the question as to who called for the execution of the whole crew, because they don't know Luffy very well. Yes, Tashigi is far above her original standard right now. Sprightly. Well, he's only met the Straw Hat crew once. The auction house should have warned him of what's coming. Oh well, at least he's got prior notice. And the thing is about the butterfly effect that things don't automatically fix in place once whatever problem's been solved. It's not mending. It's undoing whatever you've done and rethreading your actions once again to obtain the tapestry design you desire. And when it unravels, well, shit hits the fan. Doffy's about to have a very bad time. I don't quite know about Akainu though. A word about Mary. The word Mary, according to David Crystal, came to be applied to people in the 14th century, and we see it used for any kind of animated enjoyment and also when the animation is drink-fueled. Anyone happily tipsy is said to be merry. That usage goes back to the Middle Ages, when people were also said to be merry drunk. In the 16th century, this story is set in 1522 of the Pirates era. Strong ale was called Merry Go Down. Quite an apt name for a bartender, don't you think? This update's slower because I was busy signing up for scholarships and had no time to focus and write what I have in mind. And now, onto the chapter. Oh? Jacob peered at the screen. So they've decided to abort their mission? Smoker's become more convincing than ever. He let out a tinkle of laughter. But Captain Smokey, Jacob sang out, twirling a curly hair between 2 fingers. Do you think I wouldn't have accounted for your betrayal? His eyes narrowed. I won't let you go so far as to do that. He stood in front of Tapestry, fraying at the seams. As carefully as ever, he unpicked one loose thread. He plucked a hair from his head, before twining it around the emerald green thread. Then, he removed another, which had gotten stubby, and again he intertwined the slate gray with his own hair. Now, little puppets. Work for me. He leaned back in his seat. It'll be interesting to see what comes next. Do you think it would really work? People have been trying to create giants for centuries to no avail. A disguised Jacob motioned to the young Caesar. The young and confident scientist nodded enthusiastically. Jacob inwardly shook his head in disbelief. It was hard to believe that this upstanding young talent would grow to be the sociopath of his time. But nurture had its own input as well, and far be it for Jacob to discourage another's talent. Of course it will, he boasted. Just put this X and Y. Ah, but how about this? You know how paramecias are so common, right? But zones are pretty rare, and logia the most of all. I don't understand. A spark lit off behind the scientist's eyes. It could be possible. Yes, it could. Especially with Vegapunk's lineage theory. Then it's simple, is it not? Jacob smiled politely. If you want to look at Vegapunk's theory more closely, I'll join the Marine Science Department. There's bound to be someone like me, Caesar excitedly said. Then he grew quiet. There would be, won't it? Someone who doesn't feel a thing when someone's hurt, I mean. Insecurity lied under the confident bearing of the proud man of science. Of course there will be, Jacob heartily replied. Caesar Clown bustled away, delighted. If one didn't use scientific methods, how could one call himself a scientist? Jacob didn't pity the gas logia, that was for certain. Even he had his own standards. Everyone, this is Vice Admiral Smoker of the Marines. A pin could have dropped and rattled audibly with the silence that ensued. Both Thatch and Haruta stared in disbelief as the white-haired logia palmed his face once again. Cook? Haruta pointed at Smoker. This is a Marine Vice Admiral. Yeah, didn't I just tell you that? The Pirate King's cook puffed at his cigarette in a relaxed manner. A contrast to the tense manner of his two temporary companions. This guy tried to kill us not a year ago and you're saying that we go along with him? Thatch shook his head in disbelief. Are you mad? I appreciate the lack of trust you're showing me, Haruta snorted at the sarcasm, but we're wasting time here. Black Leg, what are you doing in this base? We heard that your head was responsible for poisoning our captain. Haruta crossed her arms, so where's the cure? Poison? Smoker echoed, before shaking his head. A guy like him? He's way too straightforward for that kind of. He suddenly stopped talking, face locked in a frown. You've thought of something. The cook had hit the nail on the head, judging by the wary glance that Smoker was giving the transponder snail. Our orders were to rescue the children present here on Punk Hazard, and to stop Caesar Clown's illegal activities. Smoker shoved a few reports at Sanji. The cook glanced over the papers. Evidence that there had been ships traveling to and from the deserted base, as well as large amounts of organic drugs being ordered and transferred via Dressrosa. The disappearance of a few bodies that were supposed to be present after the poison gas had evaporated, leaving the marine investigators suspicious as to the whereabouts of those that had been left behind after the evacuation. Finally, missing child reports from nearby islands with photographs of familiar faces and witness accounts detailing the disappearance of preschool-age kids from civilian neighborhoods. However, the other investigation group has found no trace of these civilian children at all, raising questions as to the purpose of his being here. We suspect that the commanding officer or his vice head had deliberately led us into a trap and that our group would have been decimated by your men, or that Caesar Clown would have finished us off, leaving both parties trapped. Smoker continued, crossing his arms. Sanji let out a hiss. So the fleet admiral had been playing them against each other, gaining the fisherman's advantage. He had known that Smoker had been stuck at Logatown precisely because of his willingness to countermand orders, forcing Black Cage Hina to constantly support his position. It was only after Marineford, when his own abilities had been proven in front of the higher-ups, had he been elevated to a position more suited to his own abilities. In the Marines, most would think that might makes right, judging by the powers that the admirals and vice-admirals possessed. However, the Marines had several warring factions within. Akainu's faction was the most dominant one, with Doberman and Momonga chief among his followers. As a result of being familiar with a few scions or princelings whose fathers were also in the world government, Akainu was popular with them, and through their influence the five elder stars. Aokiji, though not actually leading, was seen as the figurehead of another faction, with several of those who served under Garp the Fist choosing to follow him. Aokiji was also reasonably popular with those on the lower ranks of the totem pole due to his easygoing manner as opposed to Akainu's aggressive bearing. When Akainu had won, there had been greater control extended over the Marines. But at the same time, there was greater welfare for them as the Marines went through a few rounds of conchos of great powers into the Marines. Akainu was able to get more benefits such as pensions as well as protection of civilian members of the Marines, incentivizing them from deserting. This had led to greater voluntary enlistment, as the pay for the average Marine was increased as well due to the increased budget that the Marines had received due to the higher-ups negotiations. Were Aokiji to be the winner, he would have practiced moderate justice. With his style, a laissez-faire treatment of pirates and civilians alike would have been in place. There would be less tariffs because Aokiji was known to promote entrepot trade in his home port city as well as in the territories he used to govern as a vice-admiral. To the world government, that would have been a disaster, but Sanji could see that there would have been less of an incentive to turn to piracy. In that manner, there would have been stronger trade links between countries as people sought to turn their efforts into money, rather than risk their lives against the world government. This would in turn have led to less support for the Marines, but the welfare of the average civilian would have been better off. However, Aokiji was not favored among the higher-ups, and it would have been more likely that he would have been placed on a tighter leash and given less budget to do as he will. Akainu was a beneficial fleet admiral to the Marines and had led the world into a few years of uneasy peace. Aokiji would have been a better fleet admiral for civilians, but there would have been no way for him to unify the Marines from the already widening gap between those of absolute justice and moderate justice. It's a sad day when one has to choose between a merciless, mad dog, and the seemingly harmless guy who handed you your ass and joined the Blackbeard pirates when they were strong. However, we've got a problem. Mary's reported back telling us that there were no children to be found. They're still searching, but I've assigned them to destroying the cameras and evidence while I'll try to, accidentally, destroy Sad. And how do you suppose we accomplish that? It'll be pretty obvious that something's suspicious. Haruta arched an eyebrow. A sharp smirk spread across Smoker's face. Doflamingo will get into trouble for not taking proper precautions against the fact that the base that he's using happened to have 2 admirals on it. And the best way to do that. Screw you, bastard. Ace shouted back as the 2 Marines and assorted pirates raced ahead. You agreed to being bait, didn't you? The cook raised his eyebrows. Why the objection now? I agreed to being a distraction. Not this, Ace roared as he continued to sprint away from the rest. Gura. Growl. It appears Smiley disagrees with you on that. Jiru thumbed at the poisonous monstrosity that was now eyeing Ace as its new meal. All in favor of abandoning Ace to that thing? Thatch jokingly asked. Agreed. Those of G5 shouted back as Vice Admiral Smoker grunted. WHO asked you? Ace threw fireballs in an attempt to deter the axolotl from its path, only for it to continue to explode and separate into several pieces. Ma, the head of the subordinates puts his finger in his nose. We'll take you on after the whole shebang is over. Several other Marines gave a nod while Smoker palmed his face as though it pained him to do so. Swordsman. Why don't you make a move? Smoker muttered. I'm fully aware that you had evaded capture from that monster. We had Kinemon to help us. The swordsman waved at the monster. Cutting fire isn't exactly the best way to handle this thing anyway. With a flying leap, he disappeared from the gas balloon that Unit 01 had commandeered for their own, instantly reappearing right next to the smiley creature. With this sword, Shisui, I cut thee. With this sword, Wado Ichimonji, I take thee. With this sword, Sandai Kitetsu, I reap thee. Santoryu Ogi, Ichidai Senzen Daisen Sakai. His sword lit up with a bright white light, intense heat burning away at the shadowed edge. In quick succession, massive slashes were delivered to the smiley creature, causing it to stumble. Portgas, we need 1 extra large fireball to finish it off. The alleged god of food called out from his vantage point. Marimo, take care of the remains. All right. Dai Enkai. Smiley was rapidly consumed by the flames. It gurgled, lurching to one side, growls slowing and growing softer into whimpers. The salamander slumped in its position, its toxic head lolling as it feebly tried to make a move towards the group. Kokuho. Otatsamaki, 1 twirl, 2 twirls, 3 twirls. Wind surged around the swordsman, provoking a gust to blow the dirigible that the others were riding in to drift off course. As the Marines scrambled to shift back to its original heading, a dragon-shaped tornado rose into the air, roaring with the might of 1,000 men as it wound through the air, causing rocks to be swept up in its wake as it flew straight into the poisonous creature. With one last mournful cry, the creature literally exploded, sending flaming bits of poison throughout the atmosphere. It rained down on the ground, burning acidic potholes wherever it landed. Be more careful, you shitty Marimo, the cook shouted out. I am being more careful, the swordsman shouted back. Why don't you pull your own weight too? Cloud Tempo. The navigator shouted out, raising her baton. The sky rumbled, clouds gathering around them, and there were shouts of dismay. "Watch out, weather witch!" Thatch could hear one of his fellow commanders shout out. "This thing's filled with flammable gas. If the lightning hits, we're all going up in smoke." I know, the navigator shouted back. Rain tempo. The overcast clouds appeared to collapse, causing the previously clear sky to drizzle down towards the ground. The fires around them were extinguished, slowly cooling the temperature on the ground. "Oi!" Ace returned to human form. "I'm wet, sorry." The woman didn't sound sorry at all despite her words, and Thatch had to hide a chuckle as the fire logia was carried onto the back of the swordsman. The two seemed to blur into the background, reappearing almost instantaneously back on board the ship. "What was that for?" Ace loudly complained, his dripping black hair at odds with the slight hint of smoke rising above him. His soaked hat drooped in front of his face, provoking it to be yanked off as he tried to reignite again, only to have a sea stone-tipped jeet slammed right on its flat surface. Flammable gas, fire fist. The vice admiral pointed right at the balloon above them. Marco audibly thumped his head against the side of the airship, grumbling in dismay. Oh yeah, right." Ace rubbed his head sheepishly, then he started. "Why the hell didn't you do this earlier?" He stuck a finger at the swordsman, who was leaning against the railing. "What was the point of me being chased by the damn monster if you're able to get rid of this thing anyway?" he huffed. "Because we're trying to lure those damn admirals to the laboratory," the green-haired swordsman replied, giving his sword another twirl. A gentle breeze brushed past the two, causing them around them to shiver in place. "Guys, I think we might have just succeeded that," Haruta called out from starboard side. Thatch, hearing this, made his way quickly to where Haruta was, and stared down below to find two very familiar personages. One figure, angry and red and speeding across the landscape in a fiery smear. The other, making use of the readily available moisture in the air to create a smooth icy path, while at the same time freezing the other in his tracks. Thatch gulped. Hopefully they would be able to survive this encounter in one piece. "Uzu, do you think something has happened?" Mocha asked. Mocha couldn't find a calendar in the room they were in, but she guessed it must have been at least months since they had last seen their parents. She rubbed at the spot where the kind scientist had injected her with some medicine. It still it crable as the days passed. "I don't know," Uzu moaned back, hugging his legs towards himself. "I'm bored." "They promised us candy if we sit here and wait, right?" Bio pointed out. The nice Lady Monet had promised that they had to hide here while the scientist entertained important guests, but they had been stuck here for days already. Mocha knew that they had to be good children and wait, but no one had came here for hours and it was past their bedtime. The doors to the room abruptly opened. "Hey, they're back." Footsteps pattered as the children bustled around the person who opened the door, only to find that the person they were expecting wasn't there. "You're Mocha, right?" one woman asked, crossing her arms. "I'm glad we've managed to find you." "Your parents asked me to bring you home," the other woman said, extending her arms. "I'm Captain Toshigi of the Marines." "And I'm Mary." "Mary?" Uzu's eyes widened, as in Mary from Romance Dawn? Mary paused, before nodding, her smile widening. "I guess you can say that I'm the one who inspired Mary from the book." There was a cry of excitement, as the children surged around the pair, babbling about the events of the new storybook. Mocha felt her heart race with exhilaration, remembering the various chapters that Monet had read out to them as part of their bedtime. "Next time I come to this village," Aesop told her proudly as he hefted his almost bursting haversack over his shoulder, "I'll tell you adventure stories that are more unbelievable than lies." "Thank you," Mary smiled at the boy who had accompanied her throughout her childhood. "I look forward to it." "Do you know what happened to Miss Monet? She said that she'll take us out as well?" Mocha asked, waving her arms. Captain Toshigi glanced towards Miss Mary, and Mocha didn't know how to describe the expression on the Marine captain's face. It was as though she was confused, sad and a bit like the time Mocha was caught with her hand stuck in the cookie jar. Was she feeling sorry, or upset? "Miss Monet is busy with something and told us to get you first," Miss Mary replied, turning her eyes towards Mocha. "Hopefully we'll see her later. Now, who's going back to their parents?" "What are you doing with the children?" a sad voice called out. Mocha turned, only to see the kind scientist emerge from the other door. His clothes were messy and his face shone with sweat, as though he had just ran miles and miles. Rescuing them. Miss Mary's face had frozen like an icicle. Caesar Clown, formerly of the science department of the Marines. You know my name, but I don't know yours. Caesar placed his hands together. These children are safe here, and where is Monet, by the way? She's busy, as we just said. Captain Tashigi approached the kind scientist, unsheathing her sword. We're here to help. Mary, Vice Admiral Smoker's arriving here in 30 minutes with reinforcements. Oh, I don't think so. Sure, Aurora, the kind scientist cackled, his body bubbling up into fumes of gas. What's happening? Bio cried out. Come. Miss Mary ordered in a stern voice, but her face belied the rising excitement that was disjointed from the tense atmosphere. We're about to go flying on a ship. Follow the path marked by the paint and you'll be able to go outside. Cool. The boys oozed with awe as they surged ahead, out of the tunnel. One by one, the girls followed suit, filtering at a more sedate pace. Miss Mary? The blonde woman looked up towards her. Will we really be able to go home? Miss Mary did not say anything for a while. Then, she grasped Mocha's pinky. Pinky swear. I promise that you will be able to see your parents. Mocha felt a beam stretch across her face. They were going home. Unbeknownst to Mocha, Mary's other hand had its fingers crossed. Smokey. Smoker let out a grunt. The two that had chased each other, whom had fought each other, and who had even allied with each other against a common enemy. They were together once more, separated only by long thin rods of metal and sea stone. Smoker had achieved his lifelong goal of seeing Monkey D. Luffy behind bars. But there was no pride in doing so, nor was there any delight. Instead, a myriad of emotions ranging from fear, to anger, to guilt swelled and roiled within him. The tale of One Piece would come to an end, and Smoker is peering into the abyss, and finding nothing to his pleasure. The previous Pirate King had ignited the Golden Age of pirates. Whitebeard had crafted the Silver Age with a simple affirmation. The worst generation. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Monkey D. Luffy was at the forefront of this rising tide, yet others were present as well. This brief peace brought about by the Throne Wars would come to an end with this man's death, and Smoker could not understand the motivations of bringing this man, who had helped to overthrow dictators and give those downtrodden hope, down to the execution platform. Smoker was a Marine. Yet was he truly practicing justice, or the wills of others instead? We've faced each other dozens of times in battle. That makes us comrades, right? Straw Hat said. Smile stretched across his face so widely that his teeth looked as though they were straining from the smile. Protect my treasure for me. Don't be so selfish, Smoker replied, bristling. Even for a would-be king that was too far-fetched. I'm a Marine and you're the damn Pirate King. Kishishishi. No. You'll do it. Straw Hat's eyes narrowed as his smile became a smirk. Take care of my. We'll be reaching the place in 20 minutes. Marco lazily gave them a heads up as he turned back to human form. That's great. The Pirate King's cook had his feet balanced on the railing. Smoker, you sure you have no idea at all as to what poisoned Whitebeard? Yeah. Smoker patted the thing inside his pocket. This was the only thing that was under heavy security inside that base, and it's no antidote, that's to be sure. What is it, anyway? Thatch asked. If we're risking our asses for it, I want to know what we're becoming targets for. Smoker shrugged in reply. Boom. What's happening? The cook hurriedly planted his feet back on the floor as the ship rocked in response to a massive explosion reverberating through the air. Shit, that's the Research Institute. Haruta responded, her eyes searching for any signs of motion. There appears to be something flying in there. Another of those dragons? Jizo asked. Maybe if we can tame one of those. Cut that thought right out of your head, Jizo. Rikuyo smacked his ship brother's head. We're not taking one in as a pet. But, hee. The swordsman had smirked, I'm going. As if in reply, a blizzard broke out less than 20 meters from the site of the explosion. Aokiji. Thatch glanced back to where the two admirals were. They were behind us not 10 minutes ago? This isn't the admirals. The archaeologist tapped her fingers before crossing her arms. She closed her eyes and reflexively gasped. How is this possible? Why did you lie to us? Bio cried out, his fingers turning to claws. Caesar stammered back, unable to react. Damn, twice damn, thrice damn. He had been beaten by a puny little marine officer who wasn't even an admiral, had been tied up with sea stone ropes before being dragged as they went through the tunnel leading straight to the dock. Then he had thought about how close his secretary had been to the children, and had reminded them of how well that she and he had treated them while the two witches had continued to destroy the ongoing experiments. He thought he had been fairly successful, right up until the swordswoman had implied that they were going to prosecute him for experimenting, detailing how reports had already been handed over to both the marine admirals as well as the world government. Don't you know, people are so hypocritical. He had cackled back. Why don't you explain what you had done to Miss Monet, eh? Huh? My poor secretary was only trying to protect you. Caesar pretended to sob. He never would have thought that these two evil women had teamed up to slaughter her in cold blood. No way. The brat right beside him had whimpered, his face shining with tears. Miss Mary, I thought you said that she sent you ahead to rescue us. The frail blonde had whispered. And so I have. A voice cried out, and Caesar's head nearly gave him whiplash as he scrambled to see his secretary walking right behind her. How are you still alive? The officer had pointed her finger in unwavering horror. Monet was a bloody sight. Red-streaked hair combined with a blood-spattered shirt. Her face pale, leaked of blood and life fluids. A cut that went down her face right into her chest. Caesar was both horror-struck and awed. The barbarity of the women in taking down his logia secretary. Yet the wonder that this woman had lived. This was beautiful, her pale face white against the spatter. How had she survived? Was it due to the longevity of logia users? What could he do to replicate it? This could prove to have more potential than making giant children. Imagine soldiers who were unable to die, even up till the last of their breeds. You know, I don't quite know actually. Monet gurgled, as blood dribbled down her chin. Caesar felt confused. That didn't sound like Monet at all. I really wonder, are experiments all that you think about? Another voice rang out, as Vice Admiral Virgo came out from behind her. It was as though his chest was like a garden, blood congealing within his body to produce a devastating garden of bruises and cuts. The first thing that a scientist should have observed is that an experiment should have been based on scientific fact, and he shouldn't build castles in the air. Caesar was confused. The voices, despite seeming to be emitting from different sources, appeared to have the same note of arrogance. How come? Was there a transponder snail hidden in their pockets? You! The swordswomen murderously hissed out. What more could you want, Admiral? Oh, little old me? Both of them said together. I want a peaceful world without conflict. And hatred breeds conflict. Fear breeds hatred. So why are you doing this? Miss Mary burst out. You're so kind. Why are you even doing this? It's inhumane. Inhumane? They had sang out, tilting her lips in a pout. Why, I never would have thought that you would be the one saying this to me. Were it not for you, we wouldn't even be here in the first place. If not for your friends, the Year of Terror would not have threatened the rest of us bystanders. And tell me who started it, who ended the peace. That doesn't matter. What matters is the here and now. And to see my utopia, there is nothing I would do. And as I said, Caesar. Caesar froze as something seemed to gather beside him. You really should have stopped when there was something otherworldly going on. It's far too late. The one possessing Monet and Virgo giggled, sending a chill down Caesar's spine. You liars. Caesar turned back to where the children were sitting. All of them, be it the brats who had just been gathered from the surrounding countries, to those who had been there since the start of the experiment, started growling. Miss Monet was so kind. Why did you take us from our parents? We want to go back outside, we want to be free. Free? Mary's eyes had widened. What's happening? The marine swordswoman tried to touch them, concern laced in her voice, only to whip her hand back as the temperature in the tunnel started to rising. Free? Let us out. One of the larger brats started grasping at her face, screaming out. Her nails started growing larger and sharper and more brittle as stripes started appearing on her body. As she hissed, her teeth started growing sharper and her canines became fangs. She crouched, a tail springing out and growing larger. Mocha? The swordswoman whispered in fright. Mocha, are you okay? The brat's eyes had opened from their scrunched-up position, and Caesar was surprised to see that her pupils had turned to slits. She let out a roar as she leapt out, scratching at them. The swordswoman battered her away with the sheath of her sword, but the brat continued to growl at them. "Help me!" A half-growl, half-cry wormed through her throat and into their ears. The rest of the children were in no better shape. One's skin had started becoming scaly, his own half-formed lizard tail swinging wildly. Another had rolled about on the ground, hair shrinking down and turning into reddish fur. "Sniper, we have to get away, this isn't looking good for us at all," Miss Mary cried out, reaching for her companion's hand. The other woman had stood rooted to the spot, her face shining with tears. "This isn't supposed to happen at all." Her hands sprang to her face, combing through her hair. Then she turned to Caesar, teeth bared murderously. "What did you do to them?" she shouted, and Caesar could not have imagined the sight of the fires of hell burning in the background. I was testing the newest product. Smile on them," he hurriedly said, lest the woman tried to attack him with her sword. If she had done that to Monet, who was a logia and thus should not even have been harmed by a captain of all things, then he was in danger, but I hadn't finished yet. "Smile," Caesar whimpered as her hockey-claden sword was pointed right at his neck. "You tested a half-developed drug on them?" "Oh my God, the artificial zone project," Miss Mary gasped. "I thought you were trying to make them giants." I was," Caesar snarled. "But do you really think I could achieve something that hasn't been done for over 300 years? I would rather do something that no one has tried before. I was going to administer an anti-devil fruit drug in 2 weeks because it didn't seem to work, but sure, Caesar laughed, because his experiment was finally working and he had a product that Don Quixote Doflamingo would value above all else, and the weapon was perfect. It was so perfect he couldn't believe it. Thwack! Caesar could feel a bruise forming on his cheek. No wonder, for the swordswoman had slapped him with a rough and calloused palm. These were children. Civilians who should never have seen war. Children who should never have been taken out of their islands in the first place. The marine officer roared, her eyes welling up with tears. Caesar looked at her in confusion. So what if they were? Had they not seen the terror and destruction that wars left? Had they not seen the battle-scarred grounds of once green fields? And if they were civilians, then they would have been caught up either way. Famine. Terrorism. Destruction by warring pirates. Conscription. No one was innocent in this world for long. Then how shall they die? He shouted back. Would they die in battle against pirates? Be kidnapped and sold as slaves to the celestial dragons? Be hunted down just for being either a marine or a pirate? This world has never been safe for as long as we both remember. That doesn't give you the right to stamp out the will to live, the marine officer shrieked. All human beings have a choice to decide how to live, and what to do with their lives. You can't just ride roughshod. Get out! Caesar felt a strong pair of arms, no claws wrapped around him. He turned, facing another child who had taken a mammal zone. Some freakish creature of half-boy, half-fox. Was that the boy who had eaten the artificial vulpine zone fruit then? Help me! The artificial zone sobbed. I can't help, Gura. The mouth of the child widened enormously to show sharp fangs. And Caesar could feel pain bloom in his upper body as the child took a bite off his shoulder. Adrenaline sang through his blood as he tried to shake off the boy's strong grip, only to flounder miserably in vain as the grasp held firm. Caesar, he could hear one voice cry out. I'm going to shoot your cuffs. Once I have done so, you bloody well neutralize the drug that turned these kids into zone users. Sure, Aurora, of course, if Caesar was that stupid. Once he felt strength returning to his body, Caesar rapidly turned to gas, all the while cackling. These zones were famous for having one common weakness, and the gas that Caesar used was specially tailored to getting rid of them. Shuroro. Nenshoke. Miok gas. Caesar concentrates the flammable gas in the area, surrounding the children and the women while keeping himself safely out of reach. Shit. Told you it was a bad idea. The marine officer hissed out. But Caesar Clown couldn't care less for her own opinions, as he took out a match, and threw it at the surrounding atmosphere. With this, the whole tunnel would be cooked, and he could make his way out of fear free from further interference. The air exploded, carbon dioxide and water causing the air inside to suddenly become stuffy as the atmosphere was rapidly deoxygenated. Caesar could barely make out their figures through the smoke, but he could guess the result. With the dangerous experimental humans and the two witches dead, there won't be anyone stopping him from making his own escape. Where do you think you're going, Caesar? Monet's hands were gripping him. Shit, if Doflamingo discovered that the experiments were a bust, then he'll be in trouble. Oh, I'm not her, if that's what you're thinking of. Another hand had tightened around him, and Caesar gasped in dismay. I don't know what you're talking about, Caesar quickly replied, shivering as the temperature appeared to rapidly decrease even with the lack of logia powers. Why, don't you know me? I'm Cobb. Now that Caesar didn't have the weariness brought about by the sea stone, he could recognize that voice. Oh gods, it's you. Who could have forgotten the one who had driven him down the path of frustration and impatience and idiocy that was the Marine Science Department? You're the one who. Before we get on our own moral high horses, let me remind you that you gave me the license to do what I want given that the children are rescued. Wind suddenly blew through the tunnel, causing the smoke to dissipate. Caesar's eyes widened. The children had all returned back to their original forms, with no sign of their previous transformation apparent. And the two witches had no visible burn marks, though the frail one was breathing deeply. The marine officer pushed up her glasses, glinting brightly in the dark tunnel. Fair enough. I shall not intervene for this man then. The two lackeys seemed to straighten up, before collapsing on the ground. The civilian bent down, checking their pulse, before shaking her head in reply to the unspoken question that the marine officer gave her. They're both dead. I see. Now then, how shall I deal with you, you shameless SBAG who just tried to kill us all? The fires of hell that danced merrily in the background stood in sharp contrast to the cruel bloodthirsty smirk that spread across the marine officer's face. Caesar whimpered in dismay. Over here. The airship landed with barely a bump, a testament to the navigator's ability to transfer her experience in steering normal ships, as well as the general crew, to other modes of transport. Flying ship. The boys crowed, starry eyes locked onto the flying vessel. Nami could spot the two adults standing behind them. One easily familiar, one rather difficult to place. Permission to board? Toshigi was practically vibrating in her position with frustration and painfully maintained tolerance. No wonder, boarding a ship full of pirates in order to rescue kidnapped children. But Nami respected the woman. It took guts to disobey the orders one was given in order to do what was right. It was nice to see that at least this particular officer did not turn out to be an outright monster like the others were. Nami could not bear the thought of Belmir, or at least a proxy of her, killing whole islands. Nami hastily calculated the amount of weight. Thankfully, none of them had grown larger than the average adult, so she could easily make a rough estimation. Around 20 to 30 children, 2 females, a body. Wait a minute. Huh? She peered at the beaten up, heavily bruised figure that had been dismissively piled into a heap of flesh. That's weird, isn't that? Caesar clown. That's sea stone, so get some non-devil fruit users to lug him up, answered Usopp, who was busy assessing their new passengers. Then he froze, his jaw dropping to the ground. Got him. Thatch experimentally lifted the unconscious criminal scientist, before stopping. Feels lighter than I expected. I would be surprised if you hadn't, Smoker answered, chugging on probably the 5th cigar. The Marine Science Department were able to get a good balance between effectiveness and weight. Sir, may I assume that we are in an alliance? Toshigi asked, saluting Smoker as soon as the last of the children had boarded the airship. Otherwise, I would prepare to arrest them. What? Squawked the Whitebeard pirates as one. Temporary alliance, sniper. Smoker corrected her, as a collective sigh of relief hissed out. Similar to our position about the Straw Hats. You're not the typical Marine, are you? Thatch commented as he sat on the bruised figure. Nami might have felt a twinge of sympathy for him were it not for the fact he was probably the one who caused the massive explosion. And she still remembered what he did to the kids, or his secretary for that matter. HMPH. Smoker grunted. If I actually cared to count the number of times I've had to deal with Straw Hat helping the world at large, it far outweighed the times that Straw Hat was a pain in the posterior. What do you mean, pain in the ass? Ace shot back. How was Luffy? Alabasta. An image of Smoker being thrown through several walls along with Luffy's brother was enough to make Nami choke with giggles. Logatown, before that. What happened at Logatown? Asked Jiro in confusion as Zoro snickered. To make the story simple, Luffy was about to be executed, saved by lightning, got captured by him, and saved by a passing dragon. Sanji flicked a finger with each point at Smoker, who grumbled and looked away. What I'm more interested in is actually why you proposed this, Smoker. You're more of the kind who would try to do everything himself first, and the last time round it was pretty unofficial for an alliance. Which was true, come to think about it. The alliance had been initiated by Trafalgar Law, only for Luffy to modify its terms to a friendship pact. Just a heads up guys, you don't have to bow your heads to us ever again. Or kneel. Being in an alliance means being friends. Luffy delivered the half-assed explanation with a cheerful smile. Not even close, Trafalgar Law, still trying to retrieve the dregs of his dignity, shot back, even as those who had been in Punk Hazard shared a giggle at the poor image maintenance he was trying to carry out. No one was safe from Luffy's influence. They could all attest to that. Come to think about it, when they were rescuing their captain from Marineford, Zoro and Usopp had caught no trace of Trafalgar Law. Would he still be allies with them, given the rapid changes of events? Nami was slightly worried. Trafalgar Law had been an excellent ally, friend, minion and general tag-along throughout the quest for One Piece. Given that the current versions of them had not met since Sabaody, how was Luffy going to form the alliance in the first place? It's my choice on who I ally with. That's all there is to it. Smoker cryptically replied. Nami arched an eyebrow. Something was not right with how Smoker had phrased it. Add that to the suspicious behavior that he had been exhibiting thus far, she was tempted to further question him, only for something else to capture her attention. For one, Usopp had not spoken at all since spotting their newest series of passengers. For another, he was visibly wilting under the glare that the other woman was giving him. Usopp. A quiet, cool retort rang out as curious onlookers hastily took several steps back from what looked like a growing scene of domestic violence. The calm before the storm, if Nami were more poetic. Hi, it's nice to see you. Their sniper wrung his hands as he nervously backed away. The woman advanced towards him, her fists clenched, one raised at his head. You left me. Nami could practically feel the temperature drop a few degrees at the frigidity of her tone. Wordlessly, Usopp raised his hands in a conciliatory manner, only to wince as the other woman's eyes narrowed dangerously. I'm sorry. I truly am sorry for abandoning you, he quietly said. I wasn't intending to be killed. Evidently, she replied. I would have been more angry at you if you had intentionally left me on the wedding altar. For once, Sanji did not appear distressed and about to defend the woman against another man who had harmed her. Instead, he was leaning against the railing, watching the scene with weary eyes. He knows as well as I do that we have no right to intervene in this, Nami thought as the other woman tilted her head back, her nostrils flaring. Jinbei once told me that our captain wanted to die after his brother had sacrificed his life for him. She softly whispered. What you did was even worse. How did you think he would react to seeing his closest crew members dead? We made a mistake. Usopp answered, closing his eyes, bowing his head. We were more focused on rescuing him. Dying was not on our schedule. I know. But the cost was way too high, at least for him. Luffy has never dealt with losing his precious people, his nakama, very well, she said, even as she leveled a glare at all of the former Straw Hat pirates. Nami felt as though she had been soundly rebuked with her eyes alone, and she wasn't the only one, judging from how Zoro had flinched even when he was asleep on deck. The woman finally sighed, raking her hands through her hair. It wasn't just him. Usopp, I forgave you a long time ago for skipping our wedding to rescue your captain. A shy yet bittersweet smile spread across her face, lovely and yet heartbreaking. But you should have never left him alone. Hold on, Haruta, one of Whitebeard's commanders interrupted as she held out a palm. What do you mean, when Ace died? There were similar expressions of confusion and shock upon the faces of those surrounding them. Marco in particular had turned gray. Ace was blankly staring in horror at the woman. Oh, they did not tell them. No wonder. The grown, bitter woman that was the former master of Syrup Village grimly smiled. It's best that I explain. Hand me a large plate and some sake. Don't bother about the quality, I don't quite need it to be good. Was it alright for me to be born? I can't be the strongest man in the world forever? Thank you all for loving me. Jinbei, take Ace's little brother with you. Oi, I'm coming in whether you're ready or not, Whitebeard jolted as a clear and distinctive north blue voice rang out across the landscape. He had been seer what seemed like days, months even. A replay of events that had never happened, could never happened. He didn't know what was truth, and what were illusions. But Whitebeard had never forgotten what existed on the outside, even as he saw the death of his family and his sons repeatedly. Whitebeard knew that his sons were waiting for him, and he refused to give up. The bright flash of metal, and the constantly replaying events, memories, illusions, reality, shattered into tiny pieces. The source? A katana striking through the center? A hallucinatory cocktail designed to immobilize one's muscular system and distort one's sense of time and reality. The voice pronounced with disgust lacing his tone. A lanky man poked his head through the hole that his sword had made. Impressive, but I've dealt with worse drugs. Who are you? He rasped out, the effect of shouting for several hours taking its toll on him. One victim of an extremely pushy reindeer, if that actually makes sense to you. The cheeky brat answered as he lifted one foot into the area. Can you move? No, probably not. He muttered to himself. I've gotten rid of most of the drug, but you'll need to do the hard part yourself. Whitebeard gave him an incredulous look, complete with arched eyebrow. The man huffed, scratching at the back of his furry spotted hat. This is a drug-induced hallucination. I could give a far more detailed explanation, but simply put, I'm not allowed to do anything beyond breaking the hallucination. And in the flicks I've watched, you can probably do it yourself anyway. How exactly? Whitebeard growled. Because he had tried to break the illusion, and his efforts evidently weren't successful. You're a quake man, are you not? The brat rolled his eyes. That would require me to be able to move in the first place, brat. Whitebeard said wryly. The fellow had the gall to tut disapprovingly, shaking his head. Fair enough. A sharp, evil grin on par with the time Ace was still on his daily killing operation spread across the face of the kid from North Blue. Backup plan it is. Enjoy the ride. He whipped out his katana and threw it at the jar of sake barely inches away from Whitebeard. The world around them started to bend, distort, and warp around the edges, creeping ever closer to their location. You cheeky brat. Even as Whitebeard growled, the boy continued to cackle with laughter. R.O. Rozinante looked up as his boss sat down next to him. The various Whitebeard commanders had crept to various spots, still filled with shock over what they had heard from the mouth of his time-traveling boss. Time traveling. Dear gods of the sea. He said, making space, distancing. His mind echoed traitorously, from the woman who had beaten all laws of physics and common sense. Not to mention the fact that she had hid that, only choosing to serve the customers with a warm smile without revealing the depths beneath. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, and the law. But we had to keep it close to our chest. There would have been terrible consequences if we hadn't kept silent. He was determinedly not answering in words. Because Rozinante did not know how to feel about the fact that his lady boss had looked after the two of them when she could have been rescuing others. Or herself, if what he read between the lines of the argument that had taken place between her and her fiancé was correct. Former fiancé, as it turned out. Apparently, she did not take him abandoning her at the altar very lightly. Pettiness aside, there was the fact that he died before he could apologize, and was revived. A thought occurred to him. Mary? Rozinante asked quietly. Was I supposed to die? He turned to see his lady boss covering her face with her hands, revealing no part of her face to him. So she was also trying to hide her own feelings from him. Not that it mattered. Her body emanated fatigue and sorrow like a shimmering lantern after all. If Captain wasn't walking by, then yes. You would have. She finally said, after a few minutes of silence. He was good friends with Law, in the future. And he knew how important you were to Law. And the only thing that was stopping him was the fact that he didn't know how to look after you. I, who was sealed for a very long time, was his answer to the conundrum that he faced. Sealed? Rozinante asked, trying to ignore the fact that his own existence was in question on that day. He was that close to dying? And to think it was only the altruistic motives of a pirate that he had survived past Minion Island. Were he the man 15 years back, he would never have believed that a pirate could have been that selfless. But he had Law, and Mary, and Shaki. Even when the woman still scared him witless, and really, he could still remember the sleepless nights, the bright office where Sengoku pored over papers, attempting to succeed in capturing Gold Roger and his men, and each failed plan where officers were wheeled into the marine hospital after each clash, and maybe even Kuma. His circle of friends had downgraded in respectability, but when he tried to find his platoon mates, they had honorable promotions to go with their dismal deaths. Even if they were the worst S of the sea, he could not think of Mary being part of that. She was always so gentle with others, polite and warm towards others. That was the first time he had seen her reveal a grudge. How well did he know her then? What had necessitated her being sealed away? I was not quite in the right mind to make decisions. She hesitated, before revealing her face. Tears welling up in the eyes, tracks running down her cheeks. I hated the world for taking my fiancé away just because of justice. She shook her head. I have never heard of such an empty value of justice. What justice? She hollowly laughed. It's always a matter of which side wins the propaganda battle. And those who win are the ones who write the history. Rozinante winced, because that had come close to what he and Daffy had thought during their worst moments between mobs. Pirates are evil? The Marines are righteous? These terms have always changed throughout the course of history. Kids who have never seen peace and kids who have never seen war have different values. Those who stand at the top determine what's wrong and what's right. This very place is neutral ground. Justice will prevail, you say? But of course it will. Whoever wins this war becomes justice. That had rung throughout those who had watched the broadcast from Marineford. People discussed it behind closed doors, in quiet bars on the wayside. Even in the marketplace, when Mary and he were looking for supplies, he had heard the speech being discussed. Implications and all. I don't think that anyone could agree on their forms of justice. Sengoku had frequently rested upon justice in order to justify some of the deeds he was forced to carry out on the behalf of the world government. Rozinante could not blame him. It was often a choice between life and death. On the other hand, he called absolute justice bullshit, for there was no reason to go after others just to keep a secret for the celestial dragons. But I believe justice should never be limited to what they think is right or wrong, or that others have the right to control one's life. For Rozinante had seen the slave auction houses, and while not actively tearing them down, he had passed down information that could help free some slaves, a little at a time. You sound like quite the revolutionary yourself when you say that. Mary laughed, wiping away her tears. I think that's true as well. She looked at him thoughtfully. Hey, when I asked something of Law, he instantly rejected me. She pouted at the memory, and Rozinante couldn't quite bury the humor and started to chuckle. Oh come on. What did you ask him then? There was a twinkle in Mary's eye that heralded extremely bad luck. Well, the back of his metaphorical neck abruptly chilled. Brat, where the hell are we? Whitebeard called out as they across the path towards reality. Ing hell, he did not ask for this when all he wanted was to stare and watch as Punk Hazard went down in a blizzard of flames. Even when he had spotted the gaseous monster, which he so wanted to dissect, he had been thwarted by a stupid tanuki with a conscience. And now he was stuck grabbing this guy out. Why was he stuck with this? Think of the expensive equipment you saw lying next to this guy. Yes, the latest defibrillators, catheters, and all those sharp, surgical knives. Were he more short-sighted, he would have stolen them all and hired to look over those interesting machines. How did you manage to come here? Whitebeard interrupted his thought process. Bother, and he was getting to the good part about that iron lung. So sophisticated. My devil fruit makes me a free modification human, Trafalgar Law said testily. This would be its second level. Second level? Whitebeard asked, a tone of curiosity in his voice. What second level? The old hag called it awakening, but it's a bit different from what she described than that. Because he had not even heard of things like an awakening, to begin with. As well doented as the Opope no mi, there was little about its abilities. Only legends. And he was a man who dealt with fact and not opinion. Past experiences taught him that rumors only had the barest hint of truth, but it was up to the general public to search the reality behind the lies. Pity the rest of the world was apathetic as F. Like for example, my first level allows me to manipulate objects within a room as well as switch around the hearts of others. But on a higher level, I'm able to open up more things. Best not to go into too much detail. After all, it could be used against him. Law did not fancy dying just because someone wanted to get his devil fruit. He had too much of that from Doflamingo, thank you very much. HMPH. The Emperor grunted. Then you know of other examples as well? Probably. He was quite sure that there had to be other secrets lying behind Doflamingo's powers. The Ito Ito no Mi allowed the user to manipulate strings, which meant that there had to be another aspect that he could have failed to consider about Doflamingo. Law needed to do a bit more research. Wouldn't do to let that bastard escape, after all. Law had planned to use Punk Hazard as a way of getting Doflamingo cornered, before blackmailing him into leaving the warlords. Unfortunately, that devil woman had came to them, and Kora-san was so soft-hearted that he agreed, and there was no way that Law was going to allow Kora-san to be in danger without him nearby to flatten him for being stupid. Of course, Law would patch him up after that. Part of the reasons why Law had gone into surgery was because Kora-san got injured so often. That old hag would probably know, because the owner of Mary's bar had more information about the devil fruits than the book itself. If anything else, she was useful in the information network that was part of a bartender's lifestyle. Case in point, Punk Hazard's location itself. Law valued the network she maintained, even if he did not like her, period. Mary was a scary woman all right. An omnivore with the experience of tasting meat, hidden among the herbivores. Sweet and gentle to those who know her, but Law could spot someone who was grieving and angry at the world. He was one as well. Hatred behind smiles, a joke to cover killing intent. As an expert in such matters, it was his duty to guard Kora-san against that menace of a woman. If left alone, Kora-san would succumb to her wiles, and Law would follow him to the depths of hell itself. Were he a more honest person, Law might have even acknowledged that the woman did Kora-san a world of good. However, he could never forget those claws, the shiny steel beneath smooth silk. Whitebeard, we'll be continuing on this path until the whole world jolted. Law would never admit that he had let out a girlish scream at that point. And the world rolled and the ground shook, and Law scowled at the ceiling above. Probably Mary's fault. Was the thought on Thatch's mind as he walked over to where Marco was sitting, slumped against the railing. This has been going on for quite a while. What's going on, man? Marco was all but dead to the world by this time. Marco, Ace is safe and alive. Well, I'm alive too. In any case, whatever happened in that future probably would not happen again. So get a hold of yourself, idiot. Marco curled up into a ball. Ace wandered over, equally displeased at Marco's behavior. He nudged him, making him roll away a little before stopping. Tilting his head to one side, he stared at Marco Ball intensely. Then, reaching some unknown conclusion, Ace proceeded to roll Marco all around the floor. As hilarious as it appeared, Thatch should put a stop to it. Maybe, might let it go on a bit longer. No, Thatch. Marco finally said, his face a gray pallor. I completely deserve that. To think that we could have actually. Take that thought out of your head. Thatch shook his head. What would have been the point of crying over what's gone? If Goku had not intervened, from what I can tell, there were plenty of events that did not match up. Ace interjected. For one, Sabo appearing while Luffy was mid-route. For another, Moby 3's destruction. And even before that, things were different. So whatever happened in that future cannot be applied to what we are experiencing in the here and now. And didn't you hear what they said? Thatch pointed out, they can't predict the turning point as much as we can. So it's not as though things are completely useless in the future. Thatch wanted to say more, only for Marco to hold out a palm. No, it hasn't anything to do with that. Can't you see? I'm not a captain. My kind of power is meant for supporting, not for leading. I can't be sure that I will be able to protect anyone. Marco's face fell. It's Goku who was busy baring his neck for us. We never asked you to protect us from harm and danger, Ace groaned. We're pirates. We look out for each other, but that doesn't mean that we baby ourselves, requiring our captain to get ourselves out of a tangle without injury. Thatch shook his head in bewilderment. Pops knows this. You should know this as well. But remember what we promised? Live with no regrets. A familiar voice spoke out. Thatch looked aside, where their ship brothers had been gradually surrounding them. Yeah, and it's not like you expect us to pull you out of the ocean. Namur thumped Marco's back. Unlike this idiot, he pointedly glanced towards Ace, who scowled. Hey, or that time when we blew up that bar with the blonde bartender, and you had to fly at full speed in order to grab our asses to safety. That's different, Marco shouted back. I don't know how I can substitute for Pops. Not like anyone's asking you to, idiot. Haruta banged Marco's forehead before huffing. What's more important is that we look out for each other. That's right, we're brothers, we drink together, raid together. Sleep together, totally in the non-suggestive manner. Oh god, the images that just come up once you say that. Guys, keep it clean here. Anyway, Vista coughed, twirling his mustache. I, for one, think that you're a good leader. Yeah, you're the one who keeps flying from ship to pass on messages. Announce shift changes. Generally keep the booze in the infirmary. Shouldn't it be out of the infirmary? It's Pops. What do you expect? The ship shall know no peace while Pops is dry. True, true. Guys, Marco's expression is heartbreaking to say the least. What we're all trying to say is, as one, the surrounding commanders cleared their throat. Who cares if you screw up? We're all in this, like it or not. That, Thatch believed, was the straw that broke the camel's back, as tears flowed freely from Marco's eyes. Silently, Thatch offered a shoulder, and quickly felt his. But that smile on Marco's face? Probably the most grateful Thatch had ever seen. Unfortunately, the heartwarming movement ended with a blast that shook the air around them. Marco's face was set in a determined expression, and he proceeded to bark out orders to stabilize the ship. Find out if it could get faster to the moby, and to see if they would be able to ensure further cooperation from the Marine unit which had temporarily allied with them. As Thatch hurried to the place where the Marines were gathered, Ace sneakily gave him a thumbs up. Thatch smirked, returning the gesture. Time waited for no pirate, even if he was worried as a busy little bumblebee about the welfare of Pops. Kuzan was exhausted as hell. 3 days since the start of the battle, and even if his stamina still kept him up and running, it was no pleasure to stay without a nap for the last few days. Not to mention the lack of sleep. Speaking of rest, his own colleague appeared to be tiring as well. Not surprising considering the amount of effort that Sakazuki had expended on keeping his magma from cooling. Why? Oh yeah. Kuzan was still keeping Sub-Zero on in order to freeze his opponent's nerves, forcing the other admiral to consistently keep part of his hand alight to prevent heat loss. Kuzan was also having a spot of difficulty. Having a burn on his arm heavily hindered his movement when he was trying Ice Block, Partisan, and he can't quite feel his leg after a kainu had burnt the nerves. Kuzan dodged as another magma blast. He was seriously considering if it was worth the effort to keep fighting with this hard-headed zealot of justice. But he remembered Ohara. How an island had died due to the world government, and how Sakazuki had brutally executed the civilians without mercy just on the barest suspicion that someone on board might be an archaeologist. He could not allow this guy to become fleet admiral. His battered conscience demanded it, even as he could feel the toll of battle on his own body. Then, the ground shook. Kuzan glanced upwards as his own haki cried out in alarm. To his surprise, a flying ship was currently on top of the two of them. There was a silent moment of truce as Sakazuki and he stared as the ship rocked from side to side, the result of air currents being suddenly disrupted. Then, Sakazuki's eyes narrowed. This place is supposed to have been secure, he snarled, disappearing in the next second. Kuzan immediately collapsed. A time for a breather if he ever saw one. But the back of his neck tingled, and out of curiosity, he reached inward for the sixth sense that was observation haki, and paused. That was strange. He could detect newly made Vice Admiral Smoker on board that ship. While he was not exactly close to Smoker, their paths were very different, Smoker being so far from headquarters and he being stationed, and they had only been grouped together recently after the farce that was the so-called War of the Best. Last he checked, Smoker was busy preparing to be stationed in the New World. What was he doing here? The ground rocked yet again with another series of explosions. Great. So apparently abandoned bases still had working bombs. And apparently, flying ships. That relied on balloons. The Marine Science Department had mentioned the usage of airships in transportation. Something about being banned due to its flammability? Kuzan was just about to stand up again, when his vision appeared to spin. The fact that some purple thing was emitting flames and heat didn't help either. Joy, he thought. Death by smoke inhalation, and the world went black. Meanwhile, Akainu continued his speedy ascent towards the ship. He knew those presences, and this time, he would not fail. Portgas, no, Gold Roger's son, would die that day. So your alias is? Mary? She was Mary now. Mary quite contrary. It suited her. And she could remember her old friend that way. Kaya's parents were alive. Kaya was happily living in Syrup Village. Kaya would have wanted to save her parents. Mary could not, because Kaya's parents were not Mary's, and there were greater things at stake than the lives of 2 adults and the happiness of 1 girl. Because if Kaya's parents had not died, then Usopp would not have approached Kaya. If Usopp had no one to turn to after his mother Banchina had died, then Usopp would be alone. Even when Usopp had left her waiting on the wedding altar, he was still her friend. And Kaya needed Usopp as much as Usopp needed Kaya. There was no need for Mary to be there, even if in the deepest corners of her heart, she wanted to save her parents. But how could she stop that accident? Usopp's crewmate had still died, despite Captain Luffy's efforts to rescue his nakama at the cost of losing him. And Kaya could not bear the thought of being partially responsible for causing Usopp's mother to die and rescuing her from her illness, let alone being unable to save her parents. There was no role for Mary to play on Syrup Village. On the other hand, there was a need for both a caretaker and guardian here on this ship. Yes, Captain. Saru. The captain was also going by another alias, but unlike hers, it was Slippery. It was his name. But it was not, because they had sacrificed their names and their identities for this chance to emerge in the past in order to save their future. Just as there was no need for 2 Kayas of Syrup Village, there was no need for 2 of Monkey D. Luffy to exist. And there was no chance that her captain would deny his younger self of an adventure he rightfully deserved. She. Her captain ruffles her hair, knocking her fringe askew. That's a great name. He hurriedly puts his hand down as he was given a frigid glare, and something digging into his neck. Do not intrude into this area, she warned, putting her scalpel back where it belonged. Saru winces as the metal instrument glints in the sunlight. They both know that it would not hurt him. It did not stop Kaya, Mary, her name now was, from pointing it at him. Sorry, my bad. She nervously backs away, but Saru wears a grin of forgiveness. It's okay, Mary. I understand. When she was Kaya, she had a habit of taking sharp metallic instruments wherever she went. Her paranoia has been built over years of constant attack. It was no wonder that she had retained her reflexes. She had to cut back on that. A bartender did not kill as often as a pirate. So, this is your new bar? Saru surveys the dining area. A thick mahogany slab served as the countertop, with beer taps for the traditional rum and mead. Seats that were situated close to the table meant that people could choose to seat cross-legged or upright. Different kinds of cocktail glasses were slotted behind the bar at Mary's eye level, while the alcohol wholesaler's wares are left behind thick shatterproof glass. Bourbon from North Blue, Old Par, Maker's Mark. Even red-haired Shanks loved sake from West Blue. This is quite a selection. The Sabaody wholesaler had been impressed. Mary still felt a tinge of pride in that. Thank you. I had Kuma help me carry them back. At this, Saru jolts in his place. His head jerkily moving to face her, jaw dropped closer to the floor than could be humanly possible, and his eyes wider than a goldfish. Kuma? You mean Bartholomew Kuma? Saru exclaims. Why? How? It was a coincidence. Not. She had intentionally planned their trajectories to intersect. Because Kuma was not only a warlord, but a member of the Revolutionary Army, one of the 3 groups that had survived to become a power. She needed a way to gather intelligence, and Kuma was one way to get some information from Marineford. If she could hear things from Baltigo, then even better. Beginning a fishing expedition, huh? Saru sighs, but his lips curl up into a smile. I hope for big NES, Captain. Mary says, cat smile prominently displayed. I'm your soundboard. I listen for intelligence, and relay it to you. Mary has mastered the art of walking into a crowd, differentiating between voices, ears open for any important source of information that could be of use to her captain. She can go to a city, and her senses automatically tune into any conversation within hearing distance. Mary's observation skills are useful even in such a noisy place in the bar. Two Marines with neater ties than the norm. People from Marineford. North Blue accents attuned to Grand Line speak. Strange, but their cuffs show that they are old-timers that have retired to Sabaody. Members of Paradise Dwellers who have retired before taking their chances in the new world. How about that guy? Saru gnaws on a chicken drumstick even as he talks. He has never lost his taste for talking while eating, and Mary is sorely tempted to fill his next bite with ghost peppers. She might just do so the next time they meet. But Usopp had once told the story of how he had tossed chili peppers into the captain's meal at Arabasta, and the captain had continued to eat anyway. Effectiveness of spicy things is suspect. Which, Traffy's friend, Saru tries to imitate her employee by putting his hands on both sides of his face, pointer finger sticking down in a poor imitation of the tassels from that strange hat that R.O. wore. Oh, R.O. Mary huffs. He's so troublesome, huh? He falls every few feet. He always drops the glasses. He can fund ladies' night with the tips he gets from customers because he has to pay up every time he breaks something. He can't even cook to save his life as he keeps on catching on fire. Mary shakes her head. I have never seen anyone so prone to catching fire in my entire life. Even when I met Black Leg, for the first time. Oh really? Saru places his chin on top of his fist, lips twitching. Is that why you like him? Like him? Mary huffs exasperatedly. Who says? She brushes against her nose, freezing at the tell. You do, Saru sings, before dodging her attempt to box his ears. Mary hisses as he leaps away, vanishing with the calling of Jeppo as he soars out of the bar. Mary leans back against the cupboard of her bar. Saru was teasing her, except he was the densest creature known to mankind. She, liking R.O.? Far from it. He was clumsy and sometimes quiet, and there was no expression on his face, and he always tries to look cool but fails to do so, and he kept Law off the psychopathic path and calm down, she says to herself. Calm, one of Ro's favorite spells. Mary, stop thinking of him. The smell of smoke was wafting through her nostrils. Ignore it, it was just the wind. She was overthinking this, was she? Anyway, she was probably too old for him. Still, she had an idea on how this would go with the young Law. Trafalgar, she mentally referred to the older version by surname in order to keep things neater, would have stoically watched. On the other hand, Law would totally freak out if he even thought of Kora-san in a romantic relationship. Looks like she had a new toy to play with now, tee-hee. Arg. Mary rolled her eyes as she whipped out the fire extinguisher and balanced it over her shoulder. Then, she marched into the back room to rescue R.O. from his burning clothes. Again. For the third time this month. Sea gods give her patience. Smoker claps his hands, calling his men to attention. Men, move out, he orders, as though he is the director of this hastily put together pantomime. His men quickly spread out toward the scattered Whitebeard pirates, weapons in hand. Smoker is a natural at commanding. And the G5, as unpredictable as they could be, understood the importance of following his directions. Like musicians in an orchestra, they follow the direction of his hands as they move into position, letting out cries of battle. Whitebeard's sons respond in kind. Showtime. Sakazuki surveyed the ongoing scene in front of H doing their duty in trying to arrest these S. But they were evidently outclassed, judging from the pile of unconscious bodies near the poop. They should have tried harder. Useless. Utterly useless for someone to wear the symbol of justice on their backs. He would have to pull up their standards with extra training, even if these good-for-nothing creatures had no room for improvement. Sakazuki extended his senses, searching for the commanding officer. Good, someone of Vice Admiral caliber was fighting against Phoenix Marco, while another, roughly of petty officer level, was fending off Vista of the Whitebeard pirates. His eyes catch sight of a small burst of flame. Gold Roger's son was here. Sakazuki leaps at him, arm melting into magma. This time, he would not fail. The age of pirates started by this man. No, this bastard's father had to end, and Portgas Diaz was at the heart of the problem. His demonic blood called for war and violence, both of which Sakazuki was determined to stop. There was no room in this world for the never-ending strife and wars caused by the pirates. Sakazuki had tasted far too much of how these buccaneers had threatened the lives of innocent civilians for him to be convinced by those cowards of moral justice. What morality could one practice when there was no Marines left to enforce it? These pirates were obsessed with bounties and being a threat. A constant reminder of the mortality of those who were innocent. How could they be allowed to continue? Sakazuki had never forgotten what that man had done to him. Mago, Sakazuki felt his hand bubbling, and within the blink of an eye, transformed it into magma. Letting out a cry, he thrusts his claw at Fire Fist Ace. The boy dodges, but he takes a few steps back and growls. When Fire Fist was defending Straw Hat at Marineford, he had done the same thing as well. Sakazuki had questioned Garp the Fist and Sengoku, and found that it was a familial trait. Blood will out. Fire Fist curses, and screams Dai Ente as he blasts orange flames at Sakazuki. The Admiral laughs, because the so-called hellish flames are but a cold breeze as compared to the burning heat of Sakazuki's own flesh and the wrath he feels towards these creatures of war. Did you forget what I told you at Marineford? Our powers are in a relationship of superiority. He shoots a few fists at Fire Fist Ace, and as he dodges, the blasts go over the edge into the distant landscape. No matter, Sakazuki thinks as he prepares another blow, he still had plenty to spare. Huh? Sakazuki feels himself being catapulted off the ground by a collision with a flame-coated leg. Thanks for the save, Fire Fist calls. A trill is heard as the Vice Admiral's opponent escapes the fracas momentarily to attack Sakazuki. The Admiral growls, throwing a series of blows towards the 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Cooking is a gift from the gods. Who is that speaking? There was no soul that corresponded to the direction of that voice. Spices are a gift from the devil. There was intense heat coming from near him, but Sakazuki could not move. Had Fire Fist managed to duplicate himself? Diable Hambi. Collier strike. The wind was knocked out of Sakazuki as a violent kick was driven through the back of his neck. Is this Fire Fist's doing? Sakazuki could still see the 2nd Division commander cupping his hands at the corner of his eye. No, the attack came from behind. There was a litany of curses spewing from his mouth as Sakazuki swung backwards. It's the damn crew who invaded Marineford. Who the hell are they? Sakazuki swore as a few projectiles made their way towards him, and dodges the swinging set of handcuffs. TCH. Missed. The sniper from before yelps as he is caught by Sakazuki's grasp. But there is something wrong. Rather than the smell of burning flesh, it feels as though an unidentifiable liquid is escaping through his palm as the sniper whimpers in pain. USO. He hears another call out. Liar. Sakazuki tightens his grip, and sees the sniper lose consciousness. Good. He releases the man, and turns his attention back to Fire Fist. You should never turn your back on another, you know? Something breathes in his ear. Sakazuki feels the back of his neck chilled, strands of hair caressing his neck. He darts away, spinning round, but the one who had whispered vanished. See and Fleur. Hands surrounded him, grasping him with thin yet nimble fingers, and there was hissing in his ear as he felt himself being twisted, bent, the rage of 1,000 furies encapsulated in those pulsating nerves. Sakazuki scowls. He twists and turns because dissolving into his base element did not work at all, but he feels weak. There are sea stone cuffs around his wrist. When he had tried to strangle the sniper, those things must have gotten on him. Shit. Killing intent all around, anger driven by what he had done to their comrade, but they deserve it. They deserve everything that he had thrown out against them. Clutch. Sakazuki roars his rage into the heavens. It does not stop him from falling. Did you kill him? All movement on board the ship stops as the archaeologist releases the mad dog with a flurry of flower petals. No, Robin answers, turning away from her newest victim. Her nerves are taut, strained as though the strings holding her together have been overstretched and about to snap. She has never felt this sadistic, wrathful and eager to kill. The Straw Hat crew did not kill. They were symbols of hope. Where the Marines crushed the dreams of others, they brought them back alive. Yet she was on the verge of becoming as savage and ruthless as the one she held within her hands, as unforgiving as her former self, before she met Luffy and joined his crew. Robin. Usopp's fiancé addresses her from the position she had taken besides their sniper, It's okay, he's alive. Usopp chokes out a, "How's that for the great Captain Usopp?" in order to lighten up the situation, but Robin could barely make out his words. It's hardly the occasion to laugh. They were in the middle of a battle, even if it was hopelessly one-sided, yet others join in. They too are relieved that none of their comrades had died in the scuffle. They are one crew. Even when their captain is gone, they still remain. Maybe that was what their captain had intended when he left them in order to surrender himself to the Marines. Smoker's men start rolling themselves off the pile they had quickly created in those crucial few seconds between sensing Akainu's ascent and his arrival on their ship. It was the Vice Admiral's idea. To pretend to be fighting in order to throw off suspicion as to why he was cooperating with them. For Ace and Sanji to team up because they were fire users who had similar auras despite their different origins. Usopp had been their finisher, but he had been caught. Robin's heart, if it still existed, had leapt out of her chest at that. After losing Luffy, she could not bear to lose another member of her crew again. Once, she could easily relinquish those whom she formerly called crew. Now, she would not see another one die when she could help it. Her devil fruit is too easy to recognize. It was not a tactically wise decision. Yet she had moved on instinct, crossing her arms in ready position as she grasped. Yet she felt something holding her back from crushing this man's spine, from twisting his neck. Were Robin more emotion-driven, she would have called it fate denying her this man's life. But Robin is far wiser than before, and she considers the last dredges of her conscience as being the key factor preventing her from taking a life. "Robin," she jerks out of her monologue, as her fellow crewmate snaps her fingers in front of her. Nami places her hand on her hip, but there is a knowing look in her eyes. "It's fine. We're still here." She grasps Robin's own hands between her own, bending her face close to hers. "We're still alive, and their pulses beat in time, glad at being here as a group." There is a gaping hole in her chest. It was formed a TUT time and experience had muted the sharp pain. Robin does not know if she was being ungrateful in thinking that maybe it was time for them to move on. "Oi, what shall we do with this guy?" Frankie calls out, crossing his arms. "Toss him over the railing, Aokiji's sleeping, and we might as well make use of that," one of the Whitebeard commanders reply. "We still have the problem of them knowing that Robin, Schwan and Smoker were here," Sanji comments, as Smoker lets out a confirmatory grunt. Robin thinks of the fact that they are on experimental ground, with a known gas logia conducting illegal experiments, on Punk Hazard. A brilliant, impossibly vicious idea blooms from the fertile compost heaps of her mind. As if he could hear her thoughts, Robin spots Frankie visibly shivering. "I have an idea. 4 of the most terrifying words in existence." Frankie winces. "You did a number on the family jewels the last time you smiled like that, sis." Robin Kwan. "Even if you're smiling like the devil, you're still as lovely as ever." "Good grief, target brow." Zoro sighs, before giving one of his familiar slasher grins. "Well, Robin, share with us what you've just thought of." "I somehow feel that we've become the bad guys," Nami cannily comments as she starts wrecking the place, courtesy of a few weather eggs. "Doesn't matter, Melorine." Sanji had resumed his usual attitude of praising the fairer members of his crew while shooting off fiery shots in between phrases. "Your crewmate did tell us to destroy as much of this crap as we can." Ace snarks as he continues to set off explosions in the surrounding area. "I mean, like making everything that happened on this island appear to be a dream? That seems pretty harsh on them." Nami shrugs her shoulders. On the lazy admiral's side, icicles are already forming. Ace on the other hand appeared to be taking notes from Sanji about different temperatures in a gaslight. The red part's actually the coldest, at 1070 degrees Fahrenheit or 800 degrees centigrade. Sanji motions to the flame. But on the other hand, it's easier to set things on fire with it. The part of the flame with the hottest temperature is actually here, on the inside, because that is where you get the most complete combustion, and temperatures can go up to 1670 degrees Fahrenheit or 1400 degrees centigrade. "I see." Ace nodded, a smirk blooming across his face. "One pyrotechnic teaching another." Nami sighs, turning away from a situation that appeared to be turning even more wrong by the second. "Now I really don't want to know what Sanji is talking about, if I ever wanted to before." There were practically flames in the background as the two shouted tips about increasing combustion rate and the flammability of different materials. Piles of mysterious objects were tossed into the growing campfire, eerily reminiscent of the bonfire of Shandora. Nami nearly choked. It was so peaceful in the past. They had thrown a campfire a few stories high despite the crazy lightning logia with the god complex, and had danced with sky wolves merrily while singing songs and telling stories as though it was a camping trip, rather than a means of getting warm and cooking meat outside the going merry. Gods, had they been so carefree? Where had that easygoing atmosphere gone? Everyone done? At their nods, Nami drops the canister that Mary offered reluctantly. Still cruel, still prone to error, but they could not afford to be pinpointed as potential threats to the world. Even if they had to mislead two admirals into thinking that everything was a dream of Marineford, rather than the actual presence of Whitebeard pirates. Then again, would the Marines be interested in telling others? After all, they would be embarrassed if they had revealed the whereabouts of the kidnapped children. Not to mention that there was experimentation going right under the snouts of two people having a pissing contest. Yo-ho-ho-ho, going off to deliver Bink sake. Brooke sang. Skies were clear. As much as they could be with the ongoing firestorm that were the battle of the two admirals. And things were going peacefully. Flying ship. Brooke casts his eye sockets, because he had no eyes, skull joke. Towards the familiar sight of the ship of Punk Hazard. It was nostalgic, and would he say it? Awe-inspiring to see the use of flight for a humanitarian mission. Too many a time had he seen things flying from the sky to deliver death from above. To think that's something that used to inspire wonder, and for him, it was inspiring, because there was no such technology 50 years ago and it was still a newfangled thing that had to be seen to believed. Could be so dangerous. Well, Lion Chan was also exquisite in its flight capability, and as Frankie would put it, super efficient. Was that a bird? Another flying ship? Perhaps one of Frankie's robots? Fireworks? Oh, how he loved them. They used to shoot those things whenever there was a festival, and the Straw Hats loved festivals. Perhaps all had gone well. A white marine coat. The deepest chill that could be felt through the underworld went through Brooke's spine, and dare he say it, soul. No, it could not be. No. His finger joints creaked as he clenched bony fists. Skull joke. Yo-ho-ho-ho. And a haunting tune in B-flat minor with plenty of discordant chords resounded about his eardrums. Brooke clacked his jaw. What are you doing here? For this man should have stayed well away from him if he had known how unwanted he was. Missed me? The Soul King narrowed his eye sockets, stood on the railing of Moby. With a burst of strength, he leapt upward, staying in the sky, for he would not wish to hurt Whale Coon while he battled with this incessant foe who had betrayed the Straw Hats so terribly. You are but your soul. And your soul is filthy and needs the cleansing of the underworld, bade Ku Droit. With a single thrust, his sword blasted the air in front of him, straight towards the fleet admiral. With a flick, the admiral snickered, dodging the blow as he jumped with an application of Jeppo, before sending the blow sideways towards Punk Hazard. There. That should pacify that lot at least. With that, the fleet admiral faced his opponent once more. I really hoped that it wouldn't come to this. Ah well. Let me make it simple. But Brooke refused to listen. For what came from this man were but words, and Brooke knew above all else that sticks and stones may break one's bones, but words, especially from one who had plotted his way to the top, had a more damaging effect than whatever this man was able to dish out. And thus he would not listen. He would not. Gavotte bond and avant. Propelled by the force of his attack, Brooke lunged at the fleet admiral. Boring. Soru. With that, Brooke was flung aside, cut open as though the fleet admiral's foot was a pair of scissors and he was a simple piece of paper. But Brooke was no ordinary man, and even if this man's blow was able to hurt him, he was still in the game. What keeps me alive in this world is neither bodily organs nor muscles. It's my soul, Hinauta Sancho. Yahazu Jiri. His sword cane sang throughout the air with an unearthly pitch, screeching yet harmonizing with the wintry air that Admiral Iokiji's various attacks had produced. Coating his sword with his soul, he started slashing the monster, with elegant accuracy and deadly speed. Because he was just bones, and perhaps even less than that, for he was not quite clear on how their bodies had reformed. He proved his mettle by slicing across the man's stomach for extra pain. Brook was a swordsman and a pirate. Never be it he to play fair, nor he to miss his mark. The fleet admiral cried out as blood splattered across Brook's clothes. Goo! The fleet admiral spat out. It looks like you need some extra care and handling. Then he plucked out his hair and started to trace patterns. Oh no you don't, Brook cried out, dashing straight at his opponent. Though he was not familiar with this particular attack, he could guess its murderood never let anyone do. Brook froze. Well, that worked. Lucky, the fleet admiral sang as he soared past Brook. Brook helplessly craned his neck, still stuck in the position of a run. The thing is, he had been able to continue his ascent towards the air precisely because of his movement, without moving his body, well. Gia! Brook screamed out, hands and feet stuck in a lunge as he plummeted towards the sea. Not good, not good. Brook hastily pushed his soul out of his body. What? He panicked, because his body was going straight into open sea, and he was definitely going to drown. No. Wait a minute. Souls have almost negligible mass, compared to solid mass. Yo-ho-ho. Brook whizzed past the fleet admiral, noticing an expression of dismay. Good. That would teach him to leave Brook hanging like that. You. The fleet admiral pointed out, but Brook could no longer see him. Instead, within sight was Frankie, who was busy helming their temporary ride. Frankie, trouble, he shouted. My body's in danger and the fleet admiral's here? What? Frankie shouted back. I said, fleet admiral's here. Guys, we've got trouble, freaking fleet admiral's coming at us. We'll head over. His objective is probably Whitebeard, so I'll rush over while Mosshead hastens the ship. Sanji answered, leg already on the railing of the ship. Wait a minute. Zoro snarled, dragging him back on deck. Why'd I have to stay here, pervert cook? I'm the faster of the two here? Because you're more likely to get lost on the way there, sword for brains. Swirly eyebrow. The arguing duo found themselves under attack from a bow staff, courtesy of an angry navigator. We're pressed for time here, Zoro. Continue to blow the sails of this ship. We need to increase speed. Nami ordered. Sanji, quickly make it to Moby, we're counting on you. Of course Nami Swan. Go! The Pirate King's cook rushed towards the direction of the port, running through the air as though a horde of transvestites were chasing after him. Ah, nothing like the love of a woman to get one going. Wait, that kind, not that kind. Sanji inwardly shivered. Never shall those people, those terrifying and utterly ruthless creatures assimilate him into their culture. Hell memories. Like a raging inferno, Sanji literally hurtled towards the Moby like a comet, powered by the recall of his time spent fleeing from the residents of Kamabaka Kingdom. He would not be caught. Nami sighed, before frowning. That's odd. Her gifts for estimating money aside, Nami had the ability to instantly count the number of people on board, as long-term exposure to Straw Hat eccentricity had led to a better touch of numbers than what most accountants would have paid their appendages to obtain. There were 3 missing from this ship. They're gone. They must have disappeared during our bout with Akainu. Nami's eyes narrowed. Now, where could they be? Trafalgar Law hissed as he sat up, blinking rapidly. He almost had it. His eyes met the sight of his former guardian, who was scanning through the blood analysis rapidly. Good, someone who actually specialized in chemistry, rather than a surgeon who studied pharmacy only due to necessity. Hallucinatory drugs. Almost all out. He coughed out. Damn, he really had to control the output of his power. The invasion of one's mind was far too stressful on the body. It was as though he had run through the usage of 4 rooms while running a marathon. Good job. Law's eyes widened. Praise was rare from this woman. Luckily, I am familiar with this cocktail. Huh? Korra-san looked from her to the printout. Why would you be? Korra-san. Law took care not to reveal his relief. It was not good to reveal one's cards, especially in front of this carnivore. Because she invented this particular combination. I have to say though, you really have an art with pharmacy and its many charms. Law quickly stood up despite the spinning in his head to find someone standing in the doorway, who was wearing a marine cap and coat. Law sucked in a breath. So much for conserving energy to protect Korra-san. How did you get here so fast? Mary hissed, standing protectively in front of Whitebeard. With a nod, Law flattened himself against the wall, unsheathing his sword. Meanwhile, Kora-san edged towards Law, slipping an energy booster. It was something Law had designed in order to avoid tiring out mid-battle, at the expense of feeling completely shitty in 2 days' time. I had to ask you that same question too. Turns out it's really easy to attack once you've got a will to surpass others. The other man tapped his foot against the door frame. Add killing intent to Conqueror's Haki, and you manage to get rid of the rest of them. I suppose you would know. Mary snarled back. Fleet Admiral Kobe, oi, s. Smokey, the man-child turned captain turned king hissed out as Smoker stumbles, tripping over his feet as though he were but a newborn child. I know that you had no choice in this. The Marine Admiral breathes out as he falls to his knees, no longer possessing the strength to uplift himself. Smoker was tired. More worn out than after the Alabasta fiasco, and just as injured as after Punk Hazard. The Pirate King looked no better, having long since collapsed onto the sandy beach. 5 days. They weren't beating any records, but still. It was a battle to be spoken of. Wits were employed. Monkey D. Luffy utilized what little common sense and as much as his battle instincts, while Smoker had pushed the limits of his devil fruit. One to be spoken of by the masses later on once the dust had gathered. Yeah, it was Kobe who planned it out, because that was how the arrangement was, at least in the more decent faction of the Marines. Kobe was the great planner, the one who sorted out battles, delegating work. He knew how to utilize others. Smoker was more than happy to leave the bureaucracy and the red tape to Garp's protégés. Leave it to him to do the actual fighting. For that was what an admiral was for, after all. Should have guessed it. Luffy slurred out. That was a well-thought plan. I fell for it. It was not honorable. Smoker replied, deciding to lie on the floor next to his rival. The Pirate King chuckled. Pirate, Luffy hummed. This is the end of the line for me. Are you planning to pull a Roger then? For he had watched as Luffy tired more quickly than any man his age should have. Even Garp was a lean mean punching machine up till his late 70s. No reason for the Pirate King to tire so quickly, nor was he supposed to surrender without his nakama. The whole thing stunk of a trap. And Smoker was unwilling to go along with whatever madcap schemes that Luffy may come up with. In due time, the uneasy peace after the throne wars would come to an end. Tears shed, hunts breaking out, the norm. Sheehehe. We'll watch as the world make its move, eh, Smoker? Smoker let out a non-committal grunt in response. He didn't feel like replying to that nonsensical statement. Ah well. A gentle sea breeze swept through, ruffling gently through both their scalps, and the crown of Pirate Kings rustled against the ground. That's a nice wind. And Smoker watched in disbelief as Luffy raised his hand and slapped it against his jeet. Something glowed as bright and brilliant as the sun. You bastard, Mary screamed, sending several scalpels through the air. With a casual iron body, Kobe did not even flinch even as daggers shot past his head. Is that all you have, my? Those long years of imprisonment have served you well. You can't even fight back. Kobe smirked as he slammed Mary against the wall. He continued to maintain an eye on his struggling captive, while the other rotated to attend to Law. Shit. Law could not even move a muscle. This guy, I can't even move. What is this pressure? Wondering what it is, Surgeon of Death. The Fleet Admiral chortled. This is my power, I am the Fleet Admiral of the Seas. Of course I would have the will to summon others. For who do they listen to, if not I? Don't you dare. Kobe turned back to his captive. Mary, despite her small stature, was still trying to fidget and squirm under his grasp. He tightened his grip on her throat, leading for her to splutter as he kicked her right in the solar plexus. He waved a finger in front of her, and whispered that if she were to struggle anymore, her precious little ward might die. Her eyes went glassy. Then her cheeks flushed red in anger, but she remained still. Good. The soundboard was a threat when not within his hands. She could spy on his operations. Mary was too close to become an asset, and liabilities had to be taken care of as soon as possible. But killing's no good. If she were to be killed, another one would be brought back. Would it be one of the other Supernova 11? Or maybe one of Big Mom's kids? Or worst still, one of the Revolutionary Army? That group was still too volatile to be of much use. Maybe later on. when he had the time and necessary resources to cull the herd. Kobe took one hand off Mary's throat, instead holding the sea stone-tipped jeet down. "So it's you now?" The one who executed his strategy merely looked bored, perhaps even irritated. That said, he was still an obstacle. "I disagree with you on this line of action, sir," current Vice Admiral Smoker retorted. "Let's take this outside, shall we?" Acting cool now, Kobe gave a harsh grin. "Your orders were to protect the item, have you forgotten? And you failed to do that." With a disinterested glance, he kicked Mary hard enough that she fell to the ground in a crumpled heap, wincing in pain. "And you allied with the Pirate King's crew to do so, and Whitebeard's crew." "It was necessary, sir." Smoker motioned towards Mary, "and I believe that we were to treat her kindly. Having her as an enemy would be troublesome to say the least." Kobe shook his head in disbelief. The nerve of this guy, to countermand his orders, and to continue to hold on to these naive beliefs. "Well, I say that we tie up any loose ends to begin with, Smoker." "Or shall I remove you from your post then?" Smoker wouldn't dare. He valued his subordinates, especially Captain Toshigi, way too heavily to be willing to stand aside. Smoker would follow orders, whatever his distaste for them. It showed in Alabasta. In Punk Hazard. Even if he were to violently object to the world government's commands, he would still follow them. That was the hierarchical nature of the system being reflected in the quality of their soldiers. Kobe was not exactly part of the system in the beginning, but as he rose up through the ranks, he found that he had to follow the rules set. If there were no rules, then subjectivity would follow. He had seen that way too often, from the small-time crooks like former Captain Nezumi, to the way Akainu violently destroyed two soldiers who knew that they were out of their league. Orders had to be followed for the system to work. But Luffy was a wild card. A random factor that was a spanner in the works. He never saw things through. He would always try to find the best for his nakama, even if the rest of the world were to fall. And Kobe would not see the world plunge into chaos, similar to how it had done after the uneasy peace. He was too tired to have to continuously reorganize the world, to tidy up the pieces of the chessboard that Luffy had upended so carelessly. Surely Smoker, for all his moral justice issues, would understand that? After all, he was there when they had decided to lure Luffy to Dawn Island. He had seen the seas rebelling. Smoker had known what had occurred, the death toll between the fight of the four emperors, and the race of the throne had caused. Both he and Smoker had objected to the conscription, after seeing unwilling men desert for the high seas. Would he become a stone of obstruction, or an aid to a greater and more peaceful era, one that Whitebeard had ultimately rejected? Because it was Whitebeard who had done so. He was the one who had kicked off the silver era of pirates, who had caused Akainu to react by shifting Marineford, and more unfortunately, by conscription and by heavy-handedness. Kobe preferred a light touch in the beginning, because he had seen Marines shifting from one side to the other, fueled by the new disciplinary measures that Akainu had enforced. Instead of ensuring order, Akainu had created a pool of skilled sailors willing to betray their government for the freedom of piracy. What drives pirates, what drives Marines to the paths they seek? Their families. Suffering from the toll that the world government enacts on its populace? The need for freedom of the sea? Friendship and loyalty? They are all children of the sea? Rules were rules. If one were to fall, then a whole chain reaction would follow. One by one, Marines would desert Akainu's direction, inspired later on by Luffy himself as the tide turned against the old world government. And Kobe had seen the aftereffects of that. Of families hunted down merely by their outlaw of a relation. Of the war-torn battlefields caused by the emperors and the supernova alike after their quest for the throne was ended. Or even the anguished faces of people like Mary, who had to bear news of their relation having died at sea. It was so senseless, having two sides of the same coin, both with the love of the sea, having to fight just because they were loyal to their captains. Under Kobe's mandate, this would cease. If the world would be reunified. Meh. Just my way to be different. Kobe's eyes widened as he ducked down, Smoker's jeet barely missing his head. "What's wrong with you, Vice Admiral?" Kobe shouted back. "I'm on your side." Smoker simply raised an eyebrow as Kobe was forced to dodge out of the cabin to avoid his next blow, and soon the two were on the railings of the deck itself. There was shouting, of course, from the Pirate King's crew who were alighting off the dirigible. But Kobe only had eyes for Smoker, who was grinning as he slung off his vice admiral's coat to reveal a scar climbing straight from his mouth, down his neck and under his shirt. "Just following orders, sir. Just following orders." Whose was he talking about? Kobe wanted to scream. Who was Smoker following? His mind raced ahead, tracing paths and patterns that he had failed to follow up after one misstep after another. "No way. You traitor," Kobe whispered, unable to believe the conclusion that his intelligent mind had come to. It was impossible, but it made sense. But Kobe did not want to believe it. "Not by choice, I can tell you." Smoker started to code his jeet in armament hockey. "But these are the rules." They clashed, Kobe's leg against Smoker's jeet. Another clang, and Kobe furiously cursed as he felt his body weaken. "Damn it," he shrieked mentally. It was the same way that Smoker had defeated Luffy. He must have released some of the sea stone and turned it into powder, which he was able to redirect into Kobe's lungs. One of the more advanced forms of his devil fruit. And worst of all, Smoker had no qualms about using it against his former boss. Kobe had to get out of here. There was no way he would be able to fight off Smoker, the Pirate King's crew, and Whitebeard's crew at the same time. As the old proverb says, retreat is the best strategy out there. With one violent kick, he soared towards the sky. He would need to make better plans, plans that did not include Smoker. He scowled. That would be harder now. Smoker had much support in the self-defense force. Why did Smoker have to be of that? It looks like Kobe's retreating. Nami gazed as the fleet admiral flew past their reach. Smoker took care of him. "All right." Usopp cheered. Then he froze. "Wait, what?" "That's what I want to know as well." Ace clenched his fist. Why would a vice admiral willingly give up on chasing down a pirate to go after his commanding officer like that? Evidently, he was remembering the events on Alabasta, where Smoker and Ace had fought in a bid to prevent Smoker from chasing down Luffy. From what I can tell, that guy's a straight-laced freak all right. "Miss Officer," the Marine officer shot to her feet, eyes darting towards the one who spoke. "Why did your boss do so?" To the Strafat's collective surprise, Tashigi merely shook her head. "It's his story to tell," Tashigi whispered hoarsely, her eyes brimming with tears. "Huh? Oi, Mary," Mary slowly stirred, wincing as she did so. "Those kicks hurt. And it looks like someone's not welcome to her bar anymore. Like she would willingly allow a guy who betrayed her in the first place." Mary could barely make out a slight hint of a white-tinged thing. "Oh, it must be Law." "Ah, Law. You actually do care." As her vision grew clearer, she could see her ward pouting as he crossed his arms. "I'm so glad." "You idiot." Law gave her a noogie. "Ow, you're definitely stronger than that." "I am," she agreed, smiling warmly. "But if I had gone all out, then I would not be able to confirm my suspicions." Both Law and Ro looked in askance at that. She surveyed the rest of the crowd of Whitebeard pirates, who were similarly waking up after their massive timeout. "Are the others back yet?" "You think?" Law directed towards the largest crowd, full of Whitebeard pirates surrounding Whitebeard's bed. Guararara, and the apparently awake Whitebeard, who was greeting, consoling his kids. "Great. Looks like her job was done. Now, to find Smoker." She stood up, despite her head still groggy from the blow that Kobe had given her, with the help of Ro, who she had to comfort, seeing that he had frozen up after Kobe's curb stomp on her and was still in that place, and a frustrated Law, who was annoyed that he had expended effort all for nothing, to the deck, where Smoker was leaning against the railing. He spotted Mary and raised a cigar in a lazy salute. Next to him, Tashigi was busy ordering the men to take Caesar into custody, while the rest of the Straw Hats were either sitting or standing up. "Sorry for the wait," Mary said automatically, even as she was ushered into her chair by Usopp. "I presume this has to do with your apparent rebellion?" At this, Smoker smirked, showing bare teeth. "Hardly that. I've contacted Hina and the rest of the gang. They'll know he nearly caused a war that we didn't need in the first place." Smoker puffed out. "But I guess that's not the main reason why you immediately looked for me." Mary paused, looking at the floor. How could one phrase this? She did not know what to do, twisting her hands as she bowed her head. "You want to know why I fought back?" Smoker let out a nasty chuckle. "I think I know why," Mary replied. That expression on his face was of cold comfort to her. Even so, she had to confirm it. "Tell me, Smoker." She paused, heart aflutter, but words continued past her mouth despite her hesitation. "When were you going to tell us you were one of the 20? Ace heard one of the most heart-rending sounds of laughter he had ever heard in his entire lifetime. It resonated so deeply with his bitterness that he jerked out of the relatively warm, red, enthusiastic and happy feeling he had after Pops had woken up after the battle was over. Sure, Pops was still a bit sleepy, but he was fine now, and Ace felt as though a stone had dropped off his chest at that. But there was something in that laughter that Ace had to investigate. "I was not." Smoker's crisp replies somehow managed to hint at something greater than those words implied. Ace seamlessly melted into the crowd located closest to them, his ears pricked. Truth to be told, Smoker raised his head, facing the sky as he scratched his head. "I hoped that it would never come out. Not likely, I know, but it was something." Then, it was as though Smoker had observed him, because he winked at Ace. "It's not going to be much of a secret, so Portgas, you don't need to hide despite your poor abilities at doing so." Ace scowled. His displeasure had been caught temporarily outweighing his curiosity. "It's not like it's going to matter to me anyway," Ace hotly replied. "I want to make Pops king. So I'm listening because of that." Smoker shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face, similar to Gramps whenever Luffy was being too enthusiastic about his dream but Gramps not being in shape to give a fist of love. "I think you would want to know this as well, because this concerns your brother. And the way that he was captured." This enraged Ace. Luffy, his brother, being caught? He twisted on his foot, his fist ready to punch the living daylights out of Smoker, only to cough, black smoke coming out of his mouth as his lungs were suddenly smaller than he thought, and his throat was rough with something. "Oh. Devil fruit." Smoker grimaced at him as Ace fell down, coughing out black smoke tinged with gray. It was Kobe's idea. Smoker took out a cigar, twirling it about his fingers in a retrosith knew that Straw Hat Luffy would come running with the right bait. It just so happened that Straw Hat's home island had one ripe for the taking. It was not even confirmed, but on the flimsiest of pretexts, we gave him a message. "We know who the boy at Party Bar is." Simple words. "No," Tashigi choked out, shaking her head in disbelief, but Straw Hat came. "We battled." Smoker took over, tracing circles with his cigar. 5 days and 5 nights, both to the point of exhaustion. At the end, I was the last one left standing. "So that's what happened." Nami shot up to her feet, pacing angrily. "You threatened Luffy with Makino's well-being? That's horrible," she screamed, wringing her hands in open dismay. "You know who her son really is. How could you?" "Sins of the father, not sins of the child." "Of course I knew that." Smoker pointed towards Ace, who was visibly gritting his teeth. "But as you're all well aware, that child's supposed father had many enemies. All it would take would be just a hint, and even the world government could not stop the onslaught. That was why Straw Hat had to take action no matter what. So he was bait." Brook calmly spoke up, his voice icily cold. "You reminded Luffy of Ace's." "Not my plan, so hold your horses, Soul King." Smoker waved in his direction. "I was not in favor. But I was countermanded. And in turn, overruled." He stood up, gazing at the horizon. Already, he could make out the barest glimmers of daylight falling through, the sun's rays quietly disappearing. Another day, another mission. He really did not want to head into the shitfest that was going to emerge within the self-defense force. It looks like there was going to be another schism. First, between those of moral justice and absolute justice. Now, he and Kobe were on opposing sides. Hina would side with him, as would Tashigi. Kobe would bring along some of the more extreme elements with him. What a nightmare. So much politicking to be done. All for the sake of someone deceased. Even if Smoker detested the upcoming elections, he knew that it had to be done. "So you're the enforcer, then?" Mary piped up. At this, Smoker turned, and gave a warm smile. He gave a mock salute, leaning against the railings once more. "As you're the soundboard, I supposed," he replied. The former Straw Hat pirates looked confused. No wonder, if they were left in the dark as the Pirate King had intended. Smoker sometimes wondered if this was right, to intentionally leave a potential ally wandering about. But orders were orders. He could not countermand them, even if he tried to do so. What are you talking about? Zoro baldly spoke up. His eyes narrowed. What soundboard? What enforcer? Each of us was tasked with a certain role. We can't all be doctors or cooks, can we? After all, we are the members of the king's court, the 20 guardians of Raftel. Mary tilted her head in a teasing gesture. We extend our help to those who require it. We choose our kings, and we are the subjects of his will. All of the Straw Hats stood up, ready to challenge him and ask for more. Smoker had delayed them long enough, and with a nod, both he and Toshigi leapt into the air. Similarly, Mary gave a saucy wink, and sped off with Law and Ro in tow. Great, Sanji scratched his head, now what do we do? A tiny explosion immediately decided their next course of action. Okay, time to get out of here, Nami hissed as a blazing inferno of biblical proportions erupted from where Ace had previously been standing. A few white-beard pirates who were nearby were already looking for Marco, while others, long prepared from exposure to Ace, readied fire extinguishers. With a gust of wind, the Pirate King's crew and their ship were gone from sight. Now they had their answers. It was time to decide what to do. Marco, one of his brothers shouted out. The damn Marines pissed off Ace. Of course he did, Marco groaned as he glanced towards the deck, where the air was stirring up like an inferno. Izzo, Thatch. Yeah, Thatch snorted. Wonder what got him all riled up this time. That shitty bastard, come back so I can roast you. Ace was so full of rage he hardly noticed when Marco slammed a hockey-coated fist onto his head. Ace slowly looked up, before falling sideways back onto the deck. Gimme a break. Marco sighed as blue flames lit up across his arm, healing the burns away. Where are they? Both the Marines and Goku's former crew have already left. 1st Division Commander Marco, one of the newbies, reported back, glancing at Ace's unconscious. Though not for long, Marco did not hit that hard this time, form lying on the deck. I think they said something about Smoker being a member of some group of 20. Then the White Hunter said that he was the one who captured Goku. Thatch choked in disbelief. Really? That guy? He's only been a Commodore for who knows how long. And he's the one who captured a Pirate King? Marco shook his head in disbelief at that. The Vice Admirals were a class on their own, owing to the fact that the Marines stuck to having 3 admirals at any one time. Hence, the Vice Admiral position was often the final one a Marine could aim to reach in the hierarchy. There were those on the lower end of the scale, like Vice Admiral Strawberry and Onigumo, who were pretty much one-trick ponies. Then there were people like Bastille, who was promoted due to his views and not to his power level, or Doberman, who would have probably made Rear Admiral if it hadn't been for his moral justice belief. Before Roger's time, there were only Vice Admirals, and Admiral was a relatively new rank to counterbalance the 4 emperors that had appeared after Gold Roger's execution. Marco was pretty sure people like Suru or Garp would have made Admiral, had they been inclined to accept a promotion. Still, that beggared belief that a newly promoted Vice Admiral was able to escape Ace in a towering rage, especially when Ace had been given time to recover from having been imprisoned. Ow! Marco glanced at the now awakening Ace, who was rubbing at the boulder on his head. Chill, bro. Haruta snickered. Who got your panties in a twist? That guy. Ace hissed. I fought him at Alabasta not a year ago, and I could easily match him, because we were both logias whose elements countermand each other. Now, not only was he going easy on me, he even had the gall to say that he was the one who used me to capture Luffy. I'm going to burn him and... But how did he manage to stop you then? Izzo asked in curiosity. It's not like he would have come up with tricks that he hadn't used against you before. No one develops strategies within months and have the proficiency to carry them out in a split second. I dunno. Ace's ragged breathing evened out, but he somehow managed to fill my lungs with smoke. My currently burning lungs. How did he override the logia? And don't say hockey, because I'm pretty sure that he wasn't using it. Marco paused. It was as though something had twinged inside his brain. Smoke filling one's lungs sounded familiar. Hey, isn't that what the previous smoke logia did? Vista stroked his mustache and thought. Yes, I recall now. What is it, Vista? Thatch scratched his head. 30 or 40 years back, there was a bounty that was going on for this guy's head. Haruta, could you check for the bounties during that time? Haruta tilted his head as he went for the old but active bounty posters that he still kept. In a flash, they were spread out about the deck, and Vista combed through, his eyes searching through the dormant bounty posters until they lit up in recognition. Here, Vista took one out. Kitsuen, no epithet. Wanted for 600 million berries for suffocating 2 known pirate bases by their allies. The bounty picture showed a shadowy figure half hidden in smoke, with only the barest glimpse of a strong jawline and a scar running down the person's neck. His face was half hidden in shadow, but a lit cigar illuminated the fact that his teeth was yellow but even, and he lack of dental care that most pirates would have. That's what they were calling the White Hunter. A while back, Haruta pointed out. Look, he's reputed to have been part of a group called the Pirate King's Court. Pirate King's Court? Izo echoed. I was unaware that there was another Pirate King before Roger. You wouldn't have known, the way the world government went about purging the memories of these guys. Marco replied, eyes flashing across the posters. With a startled yell, Thatch picked up another bounty poster. Hey, isn't this the woman that was hanging around the marine? Cocktail immortal, name unknown. The featured person was reported to have caused a plague across 3 countries and destroyed some nature reserves that held valuable silk moths. Wanted for 30 million berries. Also a member of the Court of the Pirate King. Are there any more of these people? Ace peered at Kitsuen's poster. Looks like only 3 of them entered the bounty. Oh ho, this one is more familiar. Haruta snickered as he held up one on top of the stack from that period. End of perversion. There was a pause. What kind of name is that? Thatch snickered. Dunno, but looks like he's more of a big deal. Get this. Wanted for spreading immorality, known for peeping on at least 20 cases only to be beaten up afterwards. The man featured had his face utterly swelled up with numerous bruises dotted over his painted skin. Wanted for 20,000 berries. And these are all active. Marco slammed the Cocktail Immortals bounty poster down. Meaning there are more things that the world government isn't telling. When is it ever not? Izo shrugged as he gathered up the other bounty posters. Hey, wait a minute. He stared at the end of provision poster. I recognized that family crest on his kimono. Marco raised an eyebrow. Izo was hesitant to talk about Wano for good reason. Isn't that the Kazuki crest? Vista tapped his chin. I don't think I recognize that vassal. La la la. My ladies. A backside shook back and forth as its bearer popped out of a bush. What fine tits you have. Kaya. Pervert. The women that had been bathing in the hidden spring screamed as they rushed for their clothes. You are wrong, my ladies. The peeping Tom stood up, raising one foot off the ground, while sticking his palm right in front of him. From the east to the west, he chanted, hopping from one geta-clad foot to the other, from the north to the south. I am no mere pervert. Then what are you? One of the women screamed out as they started to reach for the nearest blunt object. I am a super achu, excuse me, someone must have been talking about me pervert, the samurai replied. The females got out of the spring, now fully dressed and well aware that there was blood dripping down his face. That only increased their fury, as they grabbed the various stones and branches that had been lying around the spring. Get him, girls. Wah ah ha ha ha. The self-proclaimed pervert screamed as the females violently accosted him. Still fair, seeing all the flesh I have to myself. He's not unconscious yet. Knock him out. Gyar HGH.